Chapter 3873. When Yi Shiwen reappeared, he was in the boundless primordial chaos. One of his hands was holding a child's hand. The two children's cultivation wasn't high enough to enter the primordial chaos, so this was their first time in it. They were very excited and interested in everything they saw. After a while, however, they lost interest. After all, there wasn't much to see in the primordial chaos. Everything was gray and hazy, and they couldn't even tell north, south, east, west, up, down, left, or right. The two children began to doze off. They were still children, after all, and it was difficult for them to stay focused. But very soon, an incomparably huge continent appeared in front of the three of them. From afar, the endless world looked like an extremely dazzling star, which finally piqued the interest of the two little fellows. "How dare you? Who dares trespass on the eternal sacred land's territory?" A loud voice boomed out from the endless world. Yes, this endless world was none other than the eternal sacred land. Several powerful figures flew out of the eternal sacred land. They were about to make a move, but when they saw Yi Shiwen, they were scared out of their wits. Why is this Grim Reaper here? Many more figures flew out after these powerful figures. Although the eternal sacred land was large, it wasn't particularly large for these celestial venerables and half-step rulers. They immediately knew what was going on. They'd thought it was some ignorant fool who dared to trespass on the eternal sacred land. Even if he was a half-step ruler, he'd still be dead. Only a ruler would be able to do as they pleased in the eternal sacred land. After the eternal sage lord, more people had joined the eternal sacred land, but all of them had been rulers without exception. Although this Grim Reaper wasn't a ruler, he was no different from one in the eyes of many. At the very least, rulers might not have killed other rulers, but he'd killed far more than one. Is he planning to join the eternal sacred land? Someone couldn't help but exclaim. They'd seen it all too often. Many sovereigns had taken over the eternal sacred land's territory throughout its history. Originally, they wouldn't have thought that way. After all, everyone knew that Yi Shiwen was the ruler of the martial epoch. Wouldn't he be more comfortable in the eternal sacred land? However, things were different now. Everyone knew that a second ruler had appeared in the martial epoch. As the saying went, two tigers cannot share one mountain. With another strong competitor, one of them had to leave. In their opinion, Yi Shiwen must have been at a disadvantage when he fought with King Qin. Now that he was chased out, he had no choice but to find another place. In comparison, was there a better place than their eternal holy land, aside from the martial epoch? However, even the loser of the battle between the two tigers was not someone they could look up to. "Why has Martial Lord Wu come to the eternal sacred land?" someone asked loudly. "I came to borrow something," Yi Shiwen said. Many heaved a sigh of relief at Yi Shiwen's words. It was much better as long as Yi Shiwen wasn't here to fight them. If a fight broke out, the eternal sacred land might be able to drive Yi Shiwen out, but the price would be too great. It might even cost them their lives. "What does Martial Lord Wu want to read?" someone asked. "I know. Many rulers have come to the eternal sacred land in the past, so I want to read through their records," Yi Shiwen said. Many people's first reaction was to refuse. After all, the records and notes left behind by their patriarchs were the most precious of treasures. No amount of wealth could buy them. However, they quickly realized that the person in front of them was not someone they could refuse just because they wanted to. "What if we don't agree?" someone asked. "Then I'll beat you until you agree. Anyone who stops me will die," Yi Shiwen said coldly. "Very well, please come in." After realizing that they had no power to stop Yi Shiwen, even the most stubborn of old men could only agree. Yi Shiwen entered the eternal sacred land with the two little fellows as if he were on a sightseeing tour. He was in no hurry. They walked toward the inheritances of the rulers, one after another. These sovereigns would leave behind many relics when they took over the sacred land. containing many classics and personal notes. These were the most valuable treasures of the sacred land, and were usually kept in the hands of the various factions in the sacred land. Now, they had to open them up to Yi Shiwen. However, they were used to it. Every ruler who had come to the eternal sacred land had read these records and notes. This was a very normal thing to begin with. Yi Shiwen took the two little fellows with him as they walked. He even helped them open their mind's eye, allowing them to observe the workings of the great Tao as they looked at the scenery. After all, the eternal sacred land itself didn't exist. It had been created by the eternal sage with great power. Later, the various rulers had reinforced and expanded it. As a result, there were various types of laws everywhere. They were even more obvious than in the martial epoch. This was why the eternal sacred land had produced so many experts. However, because the laws were incomplete, it was difficult for even rulers to complete them. As a result, it was difficult for rulers to produce experts. However, there was never a lack of half-step rulers. The two little fellows looked around as they walked. They could feel their cultivation growing at a rapid pace. Their cultivation was already very fast to begin with, but now it felt like they were flying. However, there were more benefits to be had in the future. There were many things they couldn't understand at the moment, but they would be imprinted in their souls. Slowly, as their cultivation increased, they would naturally be able to understand them. By then, even if their cultivation was very low, they would still be able to improve by leaps and bounds. This was Yi Shiwen's gift to the two little fellows. Finally, Yi Shiwen stopped at the first ruler's relic. He stayed here for a full 3 years, reading the notes and comprehending the great Tao at the same time. With the help of the wordless Tao stele, his comprehension was incredibly fast. Other rulers might need hundreds of years to understand, but Yi Shiwen was able to do so in just a few years. Then he moved on to the next place. Just like that, he led the two little fellows around. In a short 100 years, he had finished reading all the records and notes in the eternal sacred land. Not only did Yi Shiwen read them himself, but he also imprinted many of the key points of the classics into the two little fellow souls, so that they could comprehend the great Tao in the future. Countless celestial sovereigns gaped at the sight. Tears streamed down their cheeks. Just how lucky were these two little fellows? Their future prospects were limitless. They'd been sitting in the ruins for many years, but it had been difficult for them to comprehend even a tiny bit of the classics. The great Tao of a ruler was too profound for them to comprehend. Now, however, Yi Shiwen was simplifying the most complicated of the great Taos. He was teaching the two little fellows that this kind of treatment was unheard of, not even for the sons of rulers. After leaving the eternal sacred land, Yi Shiwen made his way to the everlasting sacred land. The everlasting sacred land had already made their preparations. After all, 100 years was more than enough time for them to gather information from the eternal sacred land. They didn't dare to stop Yi Shiwen in the face of his strength. After all, if they tried to stop Yi Shiwen at this time, it would be nothing more than death. He'd killed a ruler just like that, let alone a bunch of half-step rulers. In Yi Shiwen's eyes, they were no different from the weeds on the side of the road. After entering the everlasting Holy Land, Yi Shiwen took the two of them out to play and gain enlightenment. Time passed quickly. Another 100 years went by, during which time he finished reading all of the personal letters and ancient records of the various rulers of the everlasting Holy Land. Yi Shiwen was like a giant furnace. He studied the great Taos of many rulers, even those of half-step rulers, and began to refine them. In order to refine something of his own, Yi Shiwen's understanding of the great Taos increased exponentially, reaching a level that ordinary people couldn't even begin to imagine. But Yi Shiwen didn't stop. He began to follow the primordial chaos to find the ancient epics. Although the ancient epics were well hidden, and ordinary half-step rulers would have a hard time finding them, it wasn't a problem for Yi Shiwen at his current level. They had nowhere to hide, and they weren't even sacred lands. They had no way to resist Yi Shiwen, so they had no choice but to compromise. They offered their patriarch scriptures and letters for Yi Shiwen to read. Fortunately, Yi Shiwen didn't intend to start a massacre. After reading the scriptures, he left with the two little fellows. Just like that, Yi Shiwen visited the eras one after another. One after another, the great Tao was integrated into his body. His aura became more and more ethereal and restrained, but it also became more dangerous. If Yi Shiwen was like a sharp blade before, then he was like a sword hidden in its scabbard now, but his power was even more terrifying. Yi Shiwen finally called Yi Mo and Yi Wudi back after hundreds of years. He took the two little guys away. He was about to undergo his tribulation. The terrifying tribulation clouds appeared in the primordial chaos, alarming all the ancient existences there. What kind of tribulation is this? Chapter 3874. Many people were startled by this sudden, heavenly tribulation. The horrifying aura spread into the primal chaos, startling many half-step sovereigns who were still in closed-door cultivation. However, when they opened their eyes and looked into the primal chaos, they saw Yi Shiwen's figure, and they somewhat understood what was going on. If it was him, then it was normal. In the past tens of millions of years, one person had turned the entire primal chaos upside down. No one had ever been able to do this. Not even the legendary fortune creation, heavenly monarch, had been like him, regarded as a great malefic star by the various great epics. In the end, he still underwent the tribulation. Many half-step sovereigns could not help but sigh. If it was any other half-step ruler who was about to undergo tribulation, they would always say that the other party was just lucky and that it wasn't a big deal. But if this person was Yi Shiwen, then they had nothing to say, because that person didn't have any luck in crossing the retribution. On the contrary, he waited until this time to finally cross the retribution. This was something that countless people couldn't think of. Many people guessed that Yi Shiwen did not want to undergo the tribulation so easily because he was not completely confident. He carried too many things on his shoulders, and he could not afford to fail. If he failed, the glory of the martial epic would not be completely gone, but it would not be wrong to say that half of it would be gone. Although Qin Jun was very strong, his deterrence could not compare to Yi Shiwen, who had killed several sovereigns. That was the true fierceness of his name. Now, Yi Shiwen was finally going to give it a try. He was definitely completely confident. Furthermore, he had just traveled the entire primal chaos, searching for the notes and ancient records of the various sovereigns. His understanding of the great Tao had reached an extremely horrifying level. He stood in the primal chaos like a god of creation, wanting to carve out a new world in the primal chaos. Rumble! Countless heavenly tribulations fell down like rain. Each of those horrifying lightning tribulations could blast a large hole in the primal chaos. The primal chaos was already nothing, but these lightning tribulations could still blast a large hole in the void. One could easily imagine how horrifying they were. Yi Shiwen wasn't afraid in the face of these thunder tribulations. He wasn't like Qin Jun when he was crossing the tribulation. He didn't choose to face all of them head-on. He opened his hand, and his hand was like a pillar that supported the heavens. It shot up into the sky, and the terrifying lightning tribulation that was descending was actually caught by his hand, forming the word thunder. The character thunder was a character formed by the source of the great path. It was not a character of any epic. However, anyone with a certain level of cultivation would be able to understand what this character was with just a glance. It directly entered into their souls. He actually refined the heavenly tribulation into the original Tao character. How terrifying is he? Many people were shocked to see this scene. They were also shocked by Yi Shiwen's strength. Just like that lord from the Thunder era? No, he's even more terrifying than that lord. Just where did he cultivate the law of lightning to such a level? A half-step ruler cried out in alarm. Many of the half-step rulers had lived for more than 10 epochs. They had seen several rulers' tribulations, but they had never seen a main character like Yi Shiwen when crossing the tribulation. No matter how the tribulation fell, not only was it unable to harm him, but he had even refined the power of the lightning into his own Tao character. Lightning bolts rained down from the sky, and every single one of them was terrifying enough to cause the half-step sovereign realm experts' expressions to change. If they were in Huang Xiaolong's shoes, a single lightning bolt would be enough to severely injure them. 2 lightning bolts were more than enough to kill them, unless a ruler personally took action. There was no way they could resist it. But this was the heavenly tribulation for becoming a ruler. How could there be such a terrifying lightning tribulation? Many people thought of the ruler from the Thunder era. When he used his full strength, the power was roughly the same as the power of these heavenly tribulations. But now, Yi Shiwen casually withdrew these attacks. One could imagine that Yi Shiwen's current cultivation was far stronger than that ruler from the Thunder era. The heavenly tribulations continued to fall from the sky, as if they would never stop. However, these heavenly tribulations that were constantly descending would eventually be collected by Yi Shiwen. Then he would constantly integrate them into his thunder character, making it more and more terrifying. This thunder character wasn't just a manifestation of the great Tao laws. It also contained extremely terrifying energy. If he were to throw this thunder character out, even a ruler would be blown to death on the spot. Many people thought of this terrifying possibility. When they looked at Yi Shiwen again, they only felt fear. When others crossed the tribulation, they had to go all out. It was fine if they could endure it, but how could they have other thoughts? But Yi Shiwen still had the mind to refine a trump card while crossing the tribulation. It was too frightening. In other words, the current heavenly tribulations that could seriously injure an ordinary ruler hadn't forced him to use his full strength yet? Many people thought of this and felt a chill run down their spine. It was too frightening. Yi Shiwen didn't seem to think of the other's fear. He continued to refine his Tao character. Just as everyone thought, he was indeed refining a trump card. He was preparing for a possible battle in the future. His enemy was too powerful. He was unprecedentedly powerful. He had to prepare in advance. The heavenly tribulations seemed to be angered by Yi Shiwen. In the chaos, countless ancient eras began to rise with a terrifying aura. A terrifying river of time appeared in front of everyone. This river of time ran through the ages. It wasn't just an ancient era. In fact, an ancient era was just a section of this terrifying river of time. One ancient era after another joined together to occupy this long river of time. This was the Chaos River of Time. Many half-step sovereigns were shocked when they saw this scene. Even when the fortune creation Heavenly Lord was crossing the tribulation, there weren't such terrifying signs. This heavenly tribulation is too terrifying. He can't possibly cross it like this. The first heavenly tribulation since ancient times. Immediately after, everyone saw the chaotic river of time trembling. Then, an extremely terrifying figure walked out from it. It was none other than the puppet Heaven Monarch. The puppet Heavenly Lord walked out of the chaos river of time. He was extremely terrifying. Wherever his gaze landed, there was unimaginable destructive power. Looking at the scene before him, the puppet Heavenly Lord's expression was extremely terrible. Given his cultivation state, he could immediately tell that the puppet Heavenly Lord was already dead. At this time, he was just pulled back from the chaos river of time by the power of the great path of chaos. And the person who killed him was this man in front of him. How dare you kill me in the future? The puppet Heavenly Lord was extremely angry. So what if I killed you? Now that you've come out again, you'll be killed by me again. Yi Shiwen looked at him coldly. He didn't take the puppet Heavenly Lord seriously. The puppet Heavenly Monarch was enraged, but he was also shocked. Just who was this person? Why was there such a terrifying lineup when he was going through the heavenly tribulation? The heavenly Tao even had to revive itself from the river of time to suppress this person. Today, you won't have a good ending. Even if you can escape today, when I return to the past, I can kill you at that time. You'll still die. The puppet Heavenly Lord shouted loudly. Do you still have a chance? Even if you all manifest today, you'll still die. Moreover, when I achieve the great path, there will be no past, no future, only the present. You want to kill me? How is that possible? Yi Shiwen sneered. As soon as he finished speaking, he grabbed towards the void with his big hand. He directly grabbed a thunderbolt that fell from the sky and threw it out. The puppet Heavenly Lord had no time to dodge and was directly bombarded. In other words, the power of this thunderbolt was too terrifying. Its speed was also extremely fast. It was not something that ordinary people could contend with. Bang! The puppet Heavenly Monarch let out a blood-curdling scream and was sent flying backward. His body suddenly exploded. He was not a projection. He had truly awakened from the river of time. But he still couldn't stop it. Yi Shiwen's left hand slashed down like a holy sword. It directly destroyed the spirit of the puppet Heavenly Lord and erased his great path imprint. The puppet Heavenly Lord had fallen. Under the situation where he was killed by Yi Shiwen once, he was killed again after being manifested by the river of time. Everything happened too fast. No one could react to what had happened. It could be said that all of this happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. When they reacted, the puppet Heavenly Lord had already fallen. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. How could it be so terrifying? That's a sovereign realm master. How could he kill him so easily? Oh my God, I must be seeing things. This is impossible. How strong is he now? I'm afraid we can't measure his strength with our strength anymore. After Yi Shiwen killed the puppet Heavenly Lord, a terrifying aura recovered almost immediately. Those were the Dominator Heavenly Lords who had once shone in the long river of chaos history. Some of them hadn't even died yet. They had been revived all of a sudden. One powerful existence after another came out of the river of time and surrounded Yi Shiwen. Martial Monarch, you're going against the heaven. It's time to end it, all the Dominators said in unison. Chapter 3875. Dominators with tyrannical auras surrounded Yi Shiwen. Every one of them had remarkable magical powers. They had been forcibly pulled here from the chaotic river of history. It wasn't like Qin Jun's tribulation, where it was only a shadow and a great Tao imprint. Even so, it was already terrifying. Not to mention that their real bodies were here to kill Yi Shiwen. There had never been such a terrifying heaven's tribulation in history, but there had never been someone who could jump levels like Yi Shiwen. As long as he passed the heaven's tribulation, he would immediately enter the late stage of the Dominator realm. Even a triple jump wouldn't be this fast. However, Yi Shiwen had tempered himself for a long time before this, and only he knew how much he had tempered himself. A terrifying battle was on the verge of breaking out. Each of these Dominators had been pulled out of the river of history. Although they weren't at the peak of their lives, when their numbers reached this level, it was still terrifying. Rumble. Everyone could only see the entire primordial chaos collapsing. In an instant, it was like the end of the world. Under the heavenly tribulation, everything was destroyed. Time, space, heaven and earth, the universe. Nothing existed. Everything was meaningless. Oh my God, is it really the end of the world? This day will probably go down in history. With so many Dominators attacking at the same time, if the heavens' tribulation hadn't limited the range and power, I'm afraid the edge of the universe would have been destroyed. That's really the end of the world. There's no point running. Fortunately, the Dominators have restrained themselves and don't intend to destroy the world. Yi Mo and Yi Wudi, who were watching from afar, were extremely worried. With Yi Shiwen's strength, ordinary heaven's retribution wouldn't pose any difficulty to him. However, there were so many sovereigns here. Even though Yi Shiwen had killed a few sovereigns before, he had never faced such a dangerous situation. "You will be fine, right?" Yi Wudi said anxiously. Just looking at this kind of battle made him tremble with fear. It was impossible for him to be of any help at all. His strength had improved too much over the years, but Yi Shiwen's opponents were getting more and more terrifying. His improvement was like doing useless work. He couldn't help at the moment. It'll be fine. Since he chose to pass the heavens tribulation, he must be prepared. Yi Mo was also worried, but at this time he could only choose to believe in Yi Shiwen. After all, he couldn't understand a battle of that level. At this time, the battle had become even more intense. Dominator Dao tools from various ancient eras flew out and into the hands of their masters. Then, they cooperated with their masters and suppressed Yi Shiwen. It was terrifying to the extreme. It was like the end of the world. Even an ordinary ruler would have no choice but to kneel when faced with such a lineup. The only choice they had was how long they could kneel. Bang! Yi Shiwen punched through the chest of a ruler. That person was the Storm Heaven Monarch. His eyes were wide open as he was killed by Yi Shiwen for the second time. At this time, there was still a gap between him and the Storm Heaven Monarch at his peak when he was killed by Yi Shiwen. At that time, he couldn't even stop Yi Shiwen, let alone now. He was killed again. His eyes flashed with doubt. At this time, Yi Shiwen didn't care about the Storm Heaven Monarch. He couldn't care so much right now. Although his current combat strength was comparable to a mid-level ruler, his body was still at the level of a half-step ruler. In a one-on-one fight, it wouldn't be obvious. However, when the number of opponents reached a certain level, his weakness as a half-step ruler would be immediately exposed. The difference in the nature of life existed. It would always exist. He could kill a ruler with one punch. But similarly, the attacks of those rulers could also leave fatal wounds on his body. Although those rulers weren't at their peak, their power was still very terrifying when they used their Dominator Dao tools. Yi Shiwen's body was pierced more than once. Even with his strong body, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be injured. His flesh was lacerated everywhere, and his bones could be seen. Sword light, saber light, all kinds of magical powers and great Dao nomological laws greeted Yi Shiwen's body. Ordinary people would definitely be dead, but Yi Shiwen was different. His body kept brushing with the golden light of virtue. Every time it brushed, his body would completely recover. Damn, how much golden light of virtue does he have? How many ancient eras did he destroy? Otherwise, how could he have so much golden light of virtue? Many rulers cursed in their hearts. What was Yi Shiwen doing? It wasn't that they hadn't seen the golden light of virtue before. In fact, they had obtained a lot of it. For ordinary people, the golden light of virtue was unattainable. For them, it wasn't particularly mysterious or difficult to obtain. There was just too much golden light of virtue. It could even be said that it was ridiculously much. Yi Shiwen was only able to persist until now because he had a lot of golden light of virtue. I have a lot, and you can't do anything about it. Yi Shiwen's accumulation of so many years had finally erupted. He had destroyed many ancient eras. Although he hadn't led some of them, he was still the lord of the divine palace. So, the biggest reward would naturally fall on him. In addition to the merit he had obtained from continuously mending the heavens, it was unimaginable to ordinary people. Over the years, most of what he had done was for the sake of overcoming the tribulation this time. How could he be defeated by these people so easily? You think you can stop me with just you? You are more or less at your peak, but you're still far from it now. Anyone who stops me will die. Yi Shiwen formed a martial supreme seal with one hand and smashed it down continuously. His other hand formed a Dao sword and slashed it down continuously. He only attacked and didn't defend. There was just too many rulers, so he simply gave up. In any case, there was a lot of golden light of virtue. Although the merit he had obtained today was enough to make countless people feel distressed, the price he had to pay was death if he didn't succeed. Compared to death, This little bit of golden light of merit was nothing. Yi Shiwen was also incomparably terrifying when he went all out. Even if a ruler stood in front of him, he wouldn't be able to resist more than a few moves before being killed. Then he used the golden light of virtue to recover from his injuries before pouncing on the next ruler to kill. At this moment, the half-step rulers watching in the primal chaos were all dumbfounded. They had seen ferocious tribulations before, but they had never seen one this ferocious. Earlier, when Yi Shiwen covered the sky with one hand and collected all the lightning tribulations, it was already very horrifying. However, compared to this heroic scene of casually slaughtering rulers, it was like heaven and earth. Although Yi Shiwen was often severely injured, and his body had exploded more than once or twice, he recovered in the blink of an eye as if he hadn't been injured at all. For him, to be able to do this with a half-step ruler's body was already very shocking. Why is the luck of the martial epoch so vigorous? Why did such a demonic genius appear? A half-step ruler could not help asking. They felt that even the words talented genius could not describe the current Yi Shiwen. He was simply a monster, a demonic genius. Could it be that the martial epoch can really exist forever? That's impossible. The martial epoch can't really exist forever. Even if they want to, the rulers can't really let them exist forever. That's true. Although he's killing everyone, he's not facing the rulers at their peak. It doesn't mean that he's a martial monarch. At this moment, Yi Shiwen was still undergoing his tribulation. The various rulers could not stop him. Facing such a tyrannical opponent, who could even be called a demonic genius, these rulers all had different reactions. Some felt anger and humiliation. Some felt their blood surging with fighting spirit, and some smiled. They had been pulled out of the long river of history by the heavenly Tao and had to complete this task. However, they were the strongest group of people since time immemorial. Naturally, they were not puppets that could be manipulated by others. Hence, they all had different reactions. This battle lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. The terrifying battle caused the entire chaotic universe to be restless. Although the range of the heavenly tribulation was limited, its terrifying aura continued to spread. In particular, the celestial venerables of the various ancient epochs received the news and rushed over. Some rulers had already fallen in the long river of history. At this moment, these celestial venerables could still see their era's rulers fighting under the heavenly tribulation. They could only feel tears flowing down their cheeks. Even though they knew that these were flowers in the mirror and the moon in the water, summoned by the heavenly Tao from the long river of history, it was still the same. In this world, death was eternal. Once one fell, there was no way to come back. Reincarnation and rebirth were forever just a legend. Even if some people were reborn, it was only because they were lucky. Not everyone had that kind of opportunity. They only knelt down in the distance, sincerely and sincerely. This was because many of these rulers were giving their all for their era. As the battle became more and more intense, the number of rulers also decreased. Yi Shiwen killed them one by one. This process was very difficult. Although Yi Shiwen's movements were very fast and imposing, no one thought that Yi Shiwen's victory was easy. After all, Yi Shiwen had fought with his life on the line. He didn't know how many times he had been killed. If it had been someone else, they would have died long ago. This kind of battle was too terrifying. However, the more he fought, the stronger Yi Shiwen's aura became. The more rulers he killed, the easier the pressure on him became. His path became clearer and clearer. It was as if he could see the road ahead of him. By the time he killed the last ruler, 3 days and 3 nights had already passed. Chapter 38:76. By the time Yi Shiwen had killed all the rulers, 3 days and 3 nights had passed. Yi Shiwen's aura had climbed to the pinnacle. No one had ever been as strong as he was in this domain. Every time he killed a ruler, his aura would grow stronger. This was a kind of aura, and when this aura grew to a certain degree, it would become a vast and majestic aura that no one could stop. The further he went, the more terrifying he became. The rulers he killed had become a part of his force. Towards the end, no ruler could withstand more than a few moves from him. It was even to the extent that, at that moment, he even had the misconception that there was no one in the world who could withstand a single blow from him. Although he knew that it was just an illusion, it was this vast and mighty aura that gave him this illusion. No one could match him, and no one could match him. After he killed all the rulers, he sat down cross-legged. Countless laws of the heavenly Tao descended and entered his body. Or rather, it should be said that they were descending in a frenzy. Those were ruler-level laws. If he wanted to cross the final hurdle, he couldn't do it without this step. It was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to upgrade his own laws to the ruler level, and to do so under heavenly tribulation. Yi Shiwen had 3,000 martial Daos in his body, and by relying on them he was invincible. Among half-step sovereigns, it was hard to find a match. In fact, by relying on these 3,000 martial Daos, he was able to exchange blows with sovereigns. But now, it had become a hindrance to Yi Shiwen's path. He had to dig out the 3,000 martial Daos one by one. He would be drenched in blood, transforming them, refining them, and advancing them to a higher realm. Even the half-step rulers couldn't bear to watch. Yi Shiwen was having a hard time. He was going through the last step of transformation. Countless great Tao laws were descending on his body. If he wasn't careful and didn't fully absorb them, he would be seriously injured. Yi Shiwen's body would often inexplicably explode into pieces, and then he would recover after a golden light flashed. After a while, a hole would suddenly appear in his body, but it would quickly be repaired. Just like that, he was constantly being injured and then healed. He wasn't any weaker than he had been during his battle with the Sovereign Lord. Just looking at him from a distance was enough to tell how terrifying he was. For half-step sovereigns and sovereigns, it was very difficult to truly injure their physical bodies. But if they did, it would be a heavy injury. Moreover, Yi Shiwen was constantly getting injured and was constantly drawing out the principles. It was too terrifying to watch. This tribulation transcendence method is also unprecedented and will never be repeated in the future. One of the half-step sovereigns said in shock, "I've seen the transformation of a sovereign Dharma body, but I've never seen such a ferocious transformation. How could an ordinary sovereign's avatar be this terrifying? I bet that he'll be a mid-stage sovereign the moment he breaks through. I think it's more than that." Many half-step sovereigns had mixed feelings as they watched Yi Shiwen's tribulation. It would be a lie to say that they weren't moved by the sight of Yi Shiwen extending the lifespan of an era and going through an unprecedented tribulation. Every step Yi Shiwen took was difficult, but every step he took was equally shocking, leaving them speechless. Such a person should have become a sovereign. If such a person with great wisdom and perseverance couldn't become a sovereign, then who in the world deserved to become a sovereign? It's just that when the Lords return, they'll discover that the laws of the world have changed. Many people exclaimed in shock. They watched as Yi Shiwen succeeded step by step, refining the 3,000 martial paths and sublimating them one by one. Rumble. 3 years. After a full 3 years, the last terrifying tribulation lightning finally descended. But at this time, the tribulation lightning that could have posed a threat to sovereigns disappeared a meter above Yi Shiwen's head, unable to descend. The tribulation clouds in the sky finally dissipated completely. A shocking aura swept out from Yi Shiwen's body, shaking the entire primal chaos. This frenzy even swept through the various ancient eras. This. Some half-step sovereigns were dumbfounded. Since ancient times, there has never been a sovereign who was this powerful when he achieved the Tao. What's so special about this? Indeed, there has never been a sovereign who was this powerful when he achieved the Tao. But which half-step sovereign could kill a sovereign before achieving the Tao? He's never been an ordinary person. Some sovereigns were disdainful. They had long since accepted this kind of setting. I am a sovereign. These simple words were enough to announce to the entire primordial chaos that yet another sovereign had been born. In the short span of the martial epoch, 3 sovereigns had been born in succession, each stronger and more terrifying than the last. Yi Shiwen was too powerful. When he was around, the entire primal chaos had been frozen by him. They didn't know if there had ever been such a powerful sovereign since ancient times, but many half-step sovereigns knew. At the very least, they hadn't seen such a powerful sovereign in the past few epochs. Even the fortune creation, heavenly monarch, who had swept through everything in the past and entered the mysterious place, wasn't as powerful as Yi Shiwen now. Now that Yi Shiwen was so powerful, it had already become a concept, invincible. When Yi Shiwen returned to the martial epoch, countless people immediately knelt down. Although they had already treated Yi Shiwen as a sovereign before, there was still a difference between treating him as a sovereign and treating him as a sovereign. Now he was a true sovereign. Countless living beings willingly knelt down. In the eyes of many, Yi Shiwen had probably even surpassed the fortune creation heavenly monarch in terms of contributions. Countless experts came to pay their respects. Now that Yi Shiwen had advanced to a sovereign, the first thing he did was to start mending the heavens again. He even announced it to the world. "I'm going to mend the heavens. Powerhouses and experts from all over can come and watch." Yi Shiwen's voice even spread throughout the primal chaos and into the various ancient epochs. Yi Shiwen could be said to have read many ancient records from these ancient epochs. It could be said that he owed them a favor. This time, Yi Shiwen was going to return the favor. These people could all come and watch him mend the heavens. When he was mending the heavens, the various heavenly Daos would become unprecedentedly clear. Under such circumstances, these half-step sovereigns would definitely gain many benefits by watching him mend the heavens. Aside from the experts from the ancient epochs, there were also many experts from the martial epoch who could gain many benefits. When the experts from the various ancient epochs heard this news, they were skeptical at first. After all, the martial epoch was their enemy. Would they do something that clearly benefited them? However, when they thought about it, Yi Shiwen did not kill them. Or perhaps, at his level, he did not need to care about half-step sovereigns. After all, Yi Shiwen had not cared about them in the past, let alone now. Therefore, many people went directly to watch this rare grand occasion. Although they could see it from afar, it was not the same as Yi Shiwen's permission to get closer to see it. At the same time, many half-step sovereigns thought, does this prove that Yi Shiwen is even more confident? Previously, when Yi Shiwen was a half-step sovereign, he did not allow others to get close to him when he was mending the heavens, lest they affect him. However, now it did not matter to him. He did not care. This was his true display of strength. When almost everyone had arrived, Yi Shiwen finally started mending the heavens. This time, the martial epoch had yet to enter a declining period. However, the heavenly Daos still sent out all sorts of mysterious phenomena, letting everyone know that Yi Shiwen had already started mending the heavens. Yi Shiwen's body emitted countless heavenly Daos, many of which were unheard of in the martial epoch. Many experts from the ancient epochs discovered with tears in their eyes that these were the heavenly Daos of their epoch. Now, Yi Shiwen actually extracted them to fill in the gaps of the martial epoch. They did not know how Yi Shiwen's comprehension of their epoch's heavenly Daos had reached such a profound level. Furthermore, many of the Daos that Yi Shiwen mended had already disappeared. The epoch's great Daos that were destroyed were from many epochs ago. However, they reappeared in the present. Countless strands of golden light descended from the sky and poured into Yi Shiwen's body. Compared to how carefully he mended the heavens earlier, Yi Shiwen's movements were much smoother this time. There were no obstructions. This was enough to show Yi Shiwen's current astonishing cultivation. As for the other half-step sovereigns and heavenly venerables, they all felt that the heavenly Daos had never been this clear before. They only felt that their comprehension of the heavenly Daos was gradually rising. Every minute and every second was equivalent to the speed of their previous comprehension of the heavenly Daos of 100 years. It was extremely shocking. They all looked at the person sitting in the center of the primal chaos. All of this was brought about by him. However, at this moment, a spear emitting a bronze radiance appeared. It swept through the depths of the primal chaos and directly blasted towards Yishuin. Everyone was shocked, especially the many experts from the martial epoch. They were shocked and angry. However, there was nothing they could do. This spear was simply too fast. Its might was too terrifying. They could not block it at all, nor could they keep up with such speed. At this critical moment, Yi Shiwen's martial ancestor seal suddenly flew out from the top of his head and deflected the bronze spear. Bang! A loud explosion resounded. The entire primal chaos was shocked by this collision. Who is it? How dare you? You're courting death. At this moment, many people suddenly reacted. Ancient Heaven Monarch, if you want to kill me, then come out with your true body. Otherwise, I'm afraid you are still far from being able to do so. Chapter 3877. Yi Shiwen's calm words shocked the entire primordial chaos. The eternal celestial monarch was one of the strongest rulers of all time, the one who'd founded the eternal sacred land. He'd appeared just like that. If there was a ruler who could be considered the strongest throughout history, no one would be able to say for sure, because the chances of the various rulers actually meeting each other were simply too low. It was hard to say who was the strongest. Even Yi Shiwen, who killed rulers as easily as eating and drinking, didn't dare say he was the strongest. But if there was a group of the strongest, then the eternal celestial monarch would definitely be there. Even amongst sovereigns, he was an exalted existence. He hadn't come through the eternal sacred land's eternal gate. Instead, he created his own grand technique, the eternal sacred land and the eternal divine bridge, opening another gate to the mysterious place. In terms of strength, the only person who could rival him was the eternal great sage. One could imagine how powerful such a person would be. Even rulers couldn't help but become serious when they heard this name, let alone those half-step rulers, who were even more shocked. What? It's the eternal celestial monarch. How could it be him? It's over. I'm afraid the two greatest figures of all time are going to fight. Does this count as a fight that happened billions of years ago? Many people were shocked by this shocking collision. After all, both of them were among the strongest rulers in the world. Although the eternal celestial monarch was famous, Yi Shiwen's notoriety wasn't inferior in any way. At this time, a figure slowly materialized on the bronze spear. It was a figure that looked down on all time. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air when they saw this figure. The eternal celestial monarch. It really is the eternal celestial monarch. Many of the members of the eternal sacred grounds felt their eyes brimming with tears of excitement. In a sense, they were all followers of eternal celestial monarch. Although the eternal sacred grounds had many sovereigns joining them later on, in reality, it could only be the eternal sacred grounds. After all, eternal celestial monarch's influence was just too deep. Most of the creatures in the eternal sacred land were descendants of the eternal celestial monarch's followers. Although many eras had passed, the natural subservience imprinted in their blood hadn't changed. They all knelt and worshipped. That figure was holding a bronze spear and was coldly looking at Yi Shiwen. It was getting closer and closer. Yi Shiwen just opened his eyes, looked indifferently at this figure, and said, "You dare to kill me with just a projection? You're looking down on me too much. Even your main body can't be so insolent." Everyone came to a sudden realization. So this was just a projection of an ancient celestial monarch. But to them, it was still very strong. Especially the half-step rulers, they felt a suffocating feeling. If he were to descend with his true body, how powerful would he be? Many people didn't dare to imagine it. "I should have killed you back then. I can't believe I let you grow to this level." The eternal celestial monarch said indifferently, You could have killed me when I was crossing the tribulation. Why didn't you? You made me waste my means to deal with you. If you had dared to appear at that time, I would have killed you then. Yi Shiwen said indifferently. Many people opened their eyes wide again. Many people only now realized that there was such an inside story. This was the most terrifying thing. Yi Shiwen had actually prepared a backup plan to kill the eternal celestial monarch at that time. Didn't that mean that Yi Shiwen didn't use his full strength when he was crossing the tribulation? But even so, Yi Shiwen had already shocked the whole world at that time. You can't do it. If it wasn't for the fate creation, heavenly monarch, do you think you could cross the tribulation smoothly? The eternal celestial monarch said the name of another supreme powerhouse coldly. Hiss! Many people sucked in a breath of cold air. To think that the fate creation, heavenly monarch, was behind this. This matter was simply too complicated. There were so many rulers fighting behind the scenes. The level of danger was so high that if they hadn't spoken up, no one would have known. Even if you came, what could you do? You would just die. At this moment, another cold voice rang out. A figure appeared on a rank 36 azure lotus. Unfortunately, you didn't show up. Otherwise, I could have killed you. That person was none other than Qin Jun, another unparalleled expert. It's Qin Jun. Was he there during the tribulation? That's right, he's also from the martial epoch. The fate creation, heavenly monarch, is also from the martial epoch. Naturally, he favors the martial monarchs and Qin Jun. Only now did everyone realize how complicated this matter was. They could already vaguely see that the rulers had split into two camps, each trying to eliminate the other to prevent future troubles. The eternal celestial monarch looked at Qin Jun. You actually dared to come out. You used the creation key to enter the mysterious place and snatched away the primal chaos azure lotus. If not for that, your cultivation would not have advanced so quickly. Only now did many people realize that this was related to an ancient secret. This was especially so for the experts of the martial epoch. It turned out that there was indeed such a thing. Qin Jun had snatched away the creation key, indirectly causing the martial epoch's strength to decline. Of course, no one dared to criticize Qin Jun. They only understood. So that was the case. The creation key was refined by the fate creation, heavenly monarch, to enter the mysterious place. You say that I snatched away the primal chaos azure lotus from you? Qin Jun said with a cold smile. However, you probably do not know this. I am the reincarnation of the primal chaos azure lotus's primordial spirit. Previously, you fought with the eternal sage emperor, severely injuring the primal chaos azure lotus. For the sake of the primal chaos azure lotus, the two of you fought for an epoch. In the end, the primal chaos azure lotus's primordial spirit escaped and entered the martial epoch. That was how I was reborn. Everyone could not help sucking in a breath of cold air. Today, one incident followed another. There were too many things going on behind the scenes. Now, many people understood why Qin Jun's cultivation had advanced so quickly, even setting a new record, achieving the Tao after the fate creation, heavenly monarch. It turned out that he actually had such a shocking foundation. That was the primal chaos green lotus. In fact, there were many records of the primal chaos green lotus in many eras. It was a supreme Tao flower that recorded the great Tao of this world. At the beginning of every era, the primal chaos green lotus would appear to stabilize the primal chaos of the world and spread the great Tao before leaving. The primal chaos azure lotus was actually the reincarnation of the primal chaos azure lotus's primordial spirit. No wonder Qin Jun's murderous intent toward the ancient heavenly monarch was so heavy. It was the ancient heavenly monarch and the eternal sage emperor who had nearly killed him. Of course, the reincarnated Qin Jun. He could no longer be considered the primal chaos azure lotus's primordial spirit. However, this huge karma still continued. So that's how it is. Back then, I was entangled by the eternal sage emperor. Otherwise, I would have gotten rid of him. Unexpectedly, you managed to cultivate such a magic skill. The ancient heavenly monarch only felt slightly rueful. The world was unpredictable. Back when he and the eternal sage emperor fought over the primal chaos azure lotus, he had not expected such a thing to happen. Even after Qin Jun had used the fate key to charge into the mysterious place and steal the primal chaos azure lotus, while the ancient heavenly monarch and the eternal sage emperor were not paying attention. Even so, it is useless. It is impossible for you to defeat me and the eternal sage emperor, if not for the fate creation heavenly monarch's interference. Do you think you would have the opportunity to mature? It is time for the martial epic to end. The ancient heavenly monarch said, "You want to mend the heavens. This is a heaven-defying act. You have placed yourself on the opposite side of the many rulers. I just want to find a path to eternal life for all living things. It is fine if you do not help. However, if you dare to stop me, I will definitely kill you." Yi Shiwen looked at the ancient heavenly monarch and said, "Ha ha ha, martial monarch, you think too highly of yourself. What? Do you think we are all fools? Since ancient times, countless rulers have not been able to do it. Do you think you can do it?" The ancient heavenly monarch laughed heartily. He found the situation extremely laughable. Although the fate creation heavenly monarch is obstructing us this time, he will not be able to stop us for long. When that time comes, it will be time for you to die. The reincarnation cycle is the true great Tao of primal chaos. How dare you defy the heavens? If the heavens are so cold and heartless, so what if I defy them? Yi Shiwen said coldly, "A mere projection dares to be so presumptuous in front of me. You are really courting death." Yi Shiwen slapped out. The ancient heavenly monarch could not block it at all. He was directly slapped. Then his body exploded with a bang. That bit of the ancient heavenly monarch's original spirit was directly destroyed. The bronze spear instantly turned into a stream of light and disappeared. It entered the desolate edge of the universe to avoid Yi Shiwen's blade. Its original spirit could feel how terrifying Yi Shiwen was. In a situation where it did not have a master, it was not Yi Shiwen's match at all. Seeing the ancient heavenly monarch killed so easily, many experts from the ancient Holy Land trembled with fear. At this moment, they regretted coming here to watch Yi Shiwen mend the heavens. Didn't they fall into the hands of Yi Shiwen? It was simply courting death. However, to their surprise, Yi Shiwen did not have the slightest intention of blaming them. They quickly understood that Yi Shiwen did not take them seriously. Even if they were experts from the ancient Holy Land, they were no different from ants in Yi Shiwen's eyes. There was no need to kill them just because of a matter with the ancient heavenly monarch. This truly proved that Yi Shiwen had reached a certain level of strength. Chapter 3878. Because he no longer had to worry about the eternal sacred land. Even if the eternal sacred land stood on the opposite side of him, so what? Did he need to worry? Many people from the eternal sacred land felt very complicated. On one hand, they admired Yi Shiwen's broad-mindedness. On the other hand, Yi Shiwen didn't care about them at all, which made them feel very depressed. Yi Shiwen just sat quietly in the chaos, then looked up at Qin Jun and said, "Fellow Taoist, congratulations on achieving the great Tao." He looked at Qin Jun. Qin Jun had finally come out, which meant that he had finally entered the late-stage sovereign realm. He was almost invincible in the current world. Even when the fortune creation heaven monarch was in power, he wasn't this powerful. An existence that could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. He was originally very curious about Qin Jun's background. He had repeatedly created miracles, and his strength was almost no less than the legends he had created. It wasn't until today that he realized that Qin Jun had such a foundation. However, it didn't matter if Qin Jun said it now. The Chaos Green Lotus was his foundation and also his safeguard. It was something that even the eternal heaven monarch and the eternal saint monarch wanted to fight for. But now he had the strength to protect himself. This was the difference. Some people were born to be legends, such as someone like Qin Jun. Finally, some small achievements. Qin Jun smiled slightly. He had gained a lot from this time's closed-door cultivation. Since fellow Taoist is here, let's look at the great Tao of mending the heavens with me. I believe it will also be beneficial to your great Tao. Yi Shiwen invited. That's what I was thinking. Qin Jun smiled slightly. Then, Qin Jun sat down cross-legged beside Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen smiled slightly and continued to mend the heavens. Every time Yi Shiwen succeeded in mending the heavens, the heavenly Tao would explode. Then, the heavenly Tao would rectify it, and the entire rhythm would become more perfect and amazing. The lifespan of the martial epoch would also increase. Beside him, Qin Jun was constantly watching this scene. His eyes were deep and bright like the stars in the sky. He saw everything that was happening and analyzed the great Tao within. He felt that he had a new understanding of the great Tao. It was as if he and Yi Shiwen were verifying each other's Tao. How powerful were their cultivations! Verifying each other's Tao itself could allow them to gain a lot. Under the witness of countless people, Yi Shiwen had succeeded this time. Moreover, it was different from the previous times when he had mended the heavens, where he had almost suffered serious injuries. This time, he had mended the heavens with ease. His cultivation had leaped several levels after transcending the tribulation. Mending the sky would be much easier. The martial epoch extended the peak lifespan for another 10 million years. This was the peak lifespan, different from any other period of time. During this period, all living beings would be in their peak state. Geniuses would appear in large numbers, and experts would be as common as the clouds. This was simply unimaginably strong. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen with a fearful look in their eyes. All of this had been accomplished by him. He had done something that no one had ever done since ancient times. Although they did not know if the martial epoch would have a chance to exist forever, at least it seemed that there were no signs of it declining. Many experts of the various ancient epochs looked at the living beings of the martial epoch with envy. Back then, they had never received such treatment. In fact, if it were the ancient epochs that only had half-step rulers, their rise to extinction would have been even shorter. However, there were some things that could not be envied. After mending the sky, the experts of the various epochs left one after another. This time, the sky had only been mending for a few years. However, they felt that they had gained a lot from it. They had gained much more than if they had cultivated bitterly for millions of years. When Yi Shiwen mended the sky, he had practically displayed the great Tao's Tao laws in front of them. Although the great Tao laws of different epochs were different, they were essentially the same to a certain extent. They had also benefited a lot. Especially the experts of the martial epoch, they felt that their cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds. This was also the benefit that Yi Shiwen had given them. After mending the sky, Yi Shiwen invited Qin Jun to the divine court. In the depths of the divine court, there was a wordless Taoist stele in a vast and boundless space. It really is the wordless Taoist stele. However, why do I feel that it is somewhat different from before? Qin Jun could not help but feel that it was strange, because I found the wordless Taoist stele's tool spirit. Only when the wordless Taoist stele and the tool spirit fuse will it be at its strongest. Yi Shiwen said indifferently, "No wonder. This wordless Taoist stele, which countless half-step rulers and rulers have been searching for since ancient times, actually fell into your hands. What great luck!" Qin Jun could not help but exclaim. As the reincarnation of the primal chaos green lotus tool spirit, he had a flood of good fortune. However, it seemed that compared to Yi Shiwen's luck, there was still a big gap. Yi Shiwen smiled faintly and said, "It's all thanks to him that I was able to achieve my Tao. I invited you here because I want you to join me in mending the heavens. The martial epoch is our foundation. The more stable the martial epic is, the further we can go, isn't that right? Yes, that is true. However, with your strength, you should be able to complete it by yourself. Qin Jun asked, You may not know this, but because the martial epic is the great Tao of heaven and earth, the martial epic will survive for a long time. Not only will it be attacked by the ancient rulers, but it will also suffer the backlash of the heavenly Tao. There will be a vague pressure exerted on it. The longer the martial epic survives, the stronger this pressure will be. Therefore, I want to join hands with you. Yi Shiwen said, I didn't expect that I would really go against the heavens. That's fine. I've done too many things in my life anyway. Even if I die on this trip, there's nothing to be afraid of. Qin Jun said, Why would they die? The ancient heaven monarch and the eternal sage monarch are indeed terrifying. However, they are being held back by the fortune creation heaven monarch. We still have enough time to make a breakthrough. When we become peak rulers, we will kill our way into the mysterious place and help the fortune creation heaven monarch to kill them. Yi Shiwen said, He had always regarded the ancient heaven monarch and the eternal sage monarch as his final and most terrifying opponents. They had been behind the destruction of many epics. In fact, they had even accelerated the destruction of many epics. If the martial epic wanted to survive for a long time, then these two would inevitably be unavoidable opponents. Without any other choice, they would inevitably become the final opponents. I'm afraid they may not give us the time. Qin Jun said with some worry, However, there is no way out now. We can only advance bravely until the end of eternity. Only then can we stop. Well, there is no point in talking about this now. Let's comprehend the great Tao. Yi Shiwen said, For the outside world, the influence of this successful mending of the heavens was far more than this. For many people, this meant that the martial epic had entered a new era. Even the entire primal chaos had entered a new era. It was an unprecedented eternal era. As long as the heavenly Tao of the martial epic did not decline, then the living beings of the martial epic would not die. This was extremely terrifying. Tens of millions of years passed in the blink of an eye. The blue sea turned into mulberry fields again, and the world changed greatly again. The martial epic expanded several times. It was now 1/3 larger than before. 10,000 Taoists coexisted. Countless heroes advanced bravely and many more emerged. But this time Yi Shiwen released the restrictions on half-step rulers, and several half-step rulers came out. In terms of strength, the martial epic could even compare to the accumulations of countless years like the eternal sacred land and the eternal sacred land. Seeing that the martial epic was about to reach its peak, countless people looked up in anticipation, hoping that Yi Shiwen could step forward to mend the heavens. However, to everyone's surprise, someone did step forward to mend the heavens. However, that person was not Yi Shiwen, but Qin Jun. Under everyone's gazes, Qin Jun's mending of the heavens went very smoothly. He did not encounter many setbacks and successfully completed this mending of the heavens. Many experts of the ancient epic who wanted to watch a good show despaired. The current martial epic did not have only one person who could mend the heavens. There were two. If that was the case, the martial epic would have more hope of lasting for a long time. Tens of millions of years passed one after another, alternating. Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun also alternated between mending the heavens, allowing the martial epic to remain in its peak state. However, such days would eventually come to an end. Just at that instant, the martial epic, which was originally in its peak state, suddenly plunged into chaos. Scenes of imminent destruction appeared everywhere. The ground cracked, the sea overturned, and cracks appeared in the sky. A boundless aura of destruction enveloped the entire martial epic. What's going on? Such a turn of events alarmed everyone. While everyone was enjoying the benefits of the martial epic's peak state, the martial epic seemed to have skipped its declining period and entered a period of destruction. Everyone was stunned. How could it be like this? Such a change startled the experts of the various ancient epics in the primal chaos, as the aura of destruction affected their epics as well. These ancient epics were very experienced, so they immediately made this judgment. The epic was changing. To think that the epic is changing again. What's going on? The martial epic is actually forcefully changing and destroying? I understand now. The lifespan of an epic is fixed. Even if Qin Jun and Wu Jun extended the martial epic's peak lifespan, the martial epic's lifespan did not change. It is still the same lifespan. Now it is time for the backlash. Chapter 3879. The entire martial epic went from its peak to the end of the epic. Such a sudden change shocked everyone, be it the people of the martial epic or the other ancient epics. This was because they had never experienced such a situation before. This was because there had never been an epic that reached its peak state all the way to the end of the last epic. Normally, an epic would enter a long period of decline before its end. However, because of Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun, the martial epic had maintained its peak state all this time. Just when everyone thought that the martial epic had hope of lasting forever, the martial epic suddenly entered a period of destruction. The sudden horror of death enveloped everyone. In an instant, all the half-step sovereigns were alarmed. Each of them covered a large area of land. Within this area, even the destructive energy of heaven and earth couldn't invade. Many heavenly venerates also took action, helping to stabilize the situation in the fortune realm. The martial epic had always been at its peak state. Not only did it place a huge burden on the martial epic's heavenly Tao, but it also created a large number of peak experts. At such a crucial moment, these heavenly venerates and half-step sovereigns could be relied on without a doubt. This was because the martial epic was their epic. If the martial epic was destroyed, it would be very difficult for them to advance further. Immediately, everyone's wills became a stronghold, and they managed to barely stabilize the situation of the martial epic. However, everyone knew that this was just the beginning. As time went by, the destructive power of the martial epic would grow increasingly denser until it destroyed the martial epic. Outside the realm, countless ancient epics did their best to stabilize the situation of their own epic. Fortunately, they had long since experienced this. This was not their first time experiencing this kind of epic change, so they quickly thought of a way to stabilize the situation. Furthermore, they sent their armies to watch covetously, because every time an era came to an end, it was like a banquet of the century for ancient eras like them. However, they still did not dare to act rashly, as there were still two horrifying sovereigns in the martial epic. If the two of them made a move, no matter how many armies the ancient epic sent, it would be useless. Hence, they were waiting for the two of them to make a move. It was not just them. Many experts of the martial epic were also waiting for Qin Jun and Wu Jun, two peak existences of the great epics, to make a move. It could solve this problem. Before everyone's expectations, Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun finally appeared. The two of them possessed great magic power and boundless magic power. In just a moment, they stabilized the situation of the entire martial epic. The destruction everywhere finally came to a stop. However, even so, it only delayed the destruction of the martial epic. The destructive power continued to wreak havoc. Yi Shiwen walked in the chaos and comprehended. This destructive power came from the void. It could even be said that it permeated the entire martial epic, like it was setting fire to oneself. The stronger the martial epic, the stronger this destructive power. It was practically proportional. Xiao Chan was certain that the previous ancient epics had not faced such horrifying destructive power. It was precisely because the martial epic was too strong that it attracted such a horrifying threat. Now, Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun were both suppressing the destructive power from the martial epic. However, this destructive power was still growing stronger and stronger. Slowly, even Yi Shiwen felt a horrifying pressure. It was similar to the backlash of the laws. However, this time, it was the backlash of the laws of destruction. The 3,000 martial daos on Yi Shiwen's body turned into 3,000 beams of rainbow light, sweeping through the world and destroying the destructive power. On the other side, Qin Jun was also suppressing the various destructive powers. The 36-rank primal chaos green lotus materialized around him, suppressing everything. I'm afraid we can't continue like this, Yi Shiwen said to Qin Jun across the distant primal chaos. There's no other way. We can only hold on. Qin Jun said slowly, if we can't hold on, the martial epoch will be destroyed and we will all be severely injured. Hence, we don't have much time left. This is the most dangerous moment for us. Once we make it through, the martial epoch will be saved and we will be able to achieve the Tao. Qin Jun said. Yi Shiwen nodded. Although this situation was unexpected, it was within his and Qin Jun's expectations. Previously, he discovered that there would be an external force dragging the martial epoch into a period of decline every once in a while. It wasn't just because there were more and more half-step rulers and heavenly venerables, which occupied more resources. It was like a program. When it reached a fixed point, it would enter the time of destruction. This force was simply too horrifying, which led to the continuous replacement of the martial epoch. Although the replacement of the martial epoch was a process of continuous improvement and improvement, this process was not irreversible. However, I think not everyone is willing to let us wait until that time. Yi Shiwen had just finished speaking when a figure appeared in the distant primal chaos. This figure was holding an incomparably huge longbow in his hand. This longbow carried an unimaginable fluctuation of the laws, making people feel extremely horrified and creeped out. Bao Sovereign, if you dare to appear before us, you will die, Qin Jun said as he looked at the figure in front of him. This was a figure who had become a ruler by relying on the archery Tao in a distant epoch. However, that was a long time ago. No one knew how powerful the Bao Sovereign was now. It was said that his main body was the longbow in his hand. It was a terrifying Bao that had been passed down from many epochs. He had once shot a ruler to death with one arrow. That was his peak achievement. That's right, it's me. However, the one who will die today is not me, but you. The Bao Sovereign said, either you give up your unrealistic thoughts, or you will die. The Bao Sovereign sneered. He raised the longbow in his hand and then pinched it with his other hand, pulling out a terrifying arrow. This arrow was tens of millions of miles long, like a boundless waterfall. It was majestic and boundless. This terrifying arrow could pierce through an epoch. Even the epic heavenly Tao couldn't stop it. Whoosh! That terrifying arrow pierced through the primal chaos, forming a terrifying energy tide that was like an incomparably huge blade, cutting the entire primal chaos in half. Countless primal chaos was instantly annihilated, disappearing into the endless. Suddenly, a primal chaos green lotus appeared in the chaos and blocked the terrifying arrow. Then the lotus leaves of the primal chaos green lotus bloomed one by one. Boom! This arrow annihilated everything. However, it still couldn't pierce through the martial epoch. It was blocked by the chaos green lotus. Can you block every single one of my arrows? The Bao Emperor slowly asked. Bao Emperor, you don't need to waste time. Your arrows are useless. It's useless to rely on you alone. Yi Shiwen said, Martial Lord, you are indeed quick-witted. You immediately thought of our existence. Accompanied by a majestic voice, a silhouette appeared in front of everyone. It was a majestic silhouette, a person with an incomparably powerful yang qi, soaring into the sky. The entire chaos space seemed to have fallen into a different environment because of this person's existence. Young Lord, you are actually still alive. Qin Jun couldn't help but say, Rumor has it that you have already passed away? Eternity has yet to arrive. How can I die? The young lord laughed loudly and said, Yi Shiwen immediately knew who this person was. Rumor had it that in the first few eras there were yin and yang eras. In one of the yang eras, a supreme ruler was born, and he was called the Yang Lord. Since the Yang Lord is already here, then the Yin Lord should be here too. Rumor has it that you are inseparable, Yi Shiwen said lightly. I didn't expect that after so many eras, there are still people who still remember us. Another magnetic voice rang out, and a figure appeared. It was like a geometrical mass of yin qi, but it was upright and upright. Nowadays, yin and yang were all about the harmony of yin and yang. However, whether it was the Yin Lord or the Yang Lord, there was another possibility. Yin and yang did not need to be combined to walk an unprecedented path. Without a doubt, these people were all outstanding talents who had once shone in the long river of history. Each one of them could be said to be unprecedented. Yi Shiwen undoubtedly wanted to sit down and discuss with such people. However, they were powerful enemies who had always wanted to kill him. So, he couldn't afford to be lenient towards them. Because I killed you before, not the current you. But when I was going through the tribulation, Yi Shiwen said lightly. The Yin Lord's face instantly turned extremely ugly. He had been killed by Yi Shiwen before, and no matter what form it took, it was a great humiliation. You are provoking me. The Yin Lord looked at Yi Shiwen coldly and said, It's not enough. Just the three of you are not enough. Yi Shiwen did not answer the Yin Lord and only said lightly. At the same time, he looked into the depths of the chaos. What if you include me? Another extremely terrifying voice sounded, and a terrifying and huge figure appeared in the chaos. This figure was a tongue snake that was tens of thousands of miles long. This tongue snake suddenly transformed into a tall and strong man. He looked at Yi Shiwen with a cold and murderous look in his eyes. Tang Huang, rumor has it that you are the first snake since the creation of the world, the ancestor of all snakes. I didn't expect to have the chance to see you again. Yi Shiwen said lightly without panic. Chapter 3880. Any one of the four rulers was once invincible. Now that the four of them had come together, one could imagine how terrifying they were. Each of them could suppress an era. Just the four of you are not enough to kill the two of us. Yi Shiwen shook his head and said, We don't have to kill you. As long as the two of you give up your unrealistic thoughts, we can still get along well. Bao Emperor held his world destroyer Bao and said, These four people didn't come here to kill Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun. The strength of the two was indeed terrifying enough. At least one or two of them would die. Therefore, no one was willing to risk their lives for others. Only when they were alive could they have unlimited possibilities. Once they died, there would be nothing left. People like them understood the meaning of death the best. We have already come this far. Do you think we can give up? Our Tao is up there. Qin Jun walked to Yi Shiwen's side silently. His eyes were filled with determination, and the raging flames of war were burning. If that's the case, then there's nothing to talk about. Since the two of you insist on dying, then there's nothing we can do. Emperor Tang sneered and said, Right now, the two of you can't use your combat strength at all, right? Yin Jun said coldly, Yes, but it's still possible for us to improve in a short period of time. As long as we kill the two of you in the shortest time possible, this matter will not be unsalvageable. Yi Shiwen said indifferently, How arrogant! The Bao Emperor shouted loudly and directly attacked. The longbow in his hand suddenly pulled out a terrifying arrow that was tens of millions of miles long, and directly shot towards Yi Shiwen. Rumble! This terrifying arrow tore the chaos apart. Bao Emperor's attack was extremely terrifying. Even in the fortune world, one could feel a terrifying force sweeping towards them. Yi Shiwen's feet were like nails that were nailed into the chaotic void. He couldn't move because he couldn't dodge. If he dodged, the arrow would directly pierce through the fortune world. The Bao Emperor had such strength, and he also had such capabilities. His seemingly casual arrow was actually the most terrifying. Yi Shiwen raised his arm high and transformed into a shocking sword rainbow. Then he suddenly chopped down. The sword rainbow ruthlessly chopped down on the arrow, directly slicing it into nothingness. It was extremely terrifying. Two extremely frightening waves of the great path ripples directly destroyed everything. At that critical moment, a figure instantly tore through the chaos. A sword swept out from the chaos and directly slashed towards Yi Shiwen. The Bao Emperor's attack just now was like a cover for him. It was Emperor Tung. At the same time, on the other side, the Qin Lord, Yin Lord, and Yang Lord were already fighting, and another battlefield was opened. The two battlefields exploded in the midst of the primal chaos. Everyone in the entire primal chaos, be it the martial epoch or the ancient epoch, paid attention to this battle. Everyone understood that the outcome of this battle might decide the survival of the martial epoch. In fact, it could even change the situation of the entire chaos world. If it were in the past, Yi Shiwen and Qin Lord's strength could be considered terrifying. No one would worry about them losing. This was also not the first time Yi Shiwen was surrounded by a few rulers. However, it was different this time. He still had to divide his attention to suppress the power of destruction in the entire martial epoch. It was unknown how much strength he could display. Moreover, these people were clearly much more terrifying than the Storm Heaven Monarch and the others. We can't let the two lords be distracted during the battle. Do your best to suppress the power of destruction until the two lords return. At this moment, a half-step ruler shouted loudly. Then, all the magic power in his body burned. All sorts of great path laws surged out, suppressing the creation realm within a radius of billions of miles. Whether they were infected or if they wanted to survive, it was time for them to make a choice. No one could sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. Because of Yi Shiwen and Qin Lord, many people who could not break through to the half-step ruler level broke through. Many heavenly venerables were born because of this. Now it was time to pay the price. Many heavenly venerables, half-step rulers, and even sovereign emperors burned themselves to stabilize the strength of the martial epoch. Horrifying auras soared into the sky, stirring up the primal chaos and shocking those ancient epochs. With the current strength of the martial epoch, even if it was destroyed, it would still be an overlord among the many ancient epochs. The originally stronger demonic epoch and others were not worth mentioning before the martial epoch. They were not on the same level. This was because the current martial epoch was too strong, putting too much pressure on them. Behind them, the half-step rulers, heavenly venerables, and sovereign emperors burned themselves to stabilize the situation of the martial epoch. Hence, Yi Shiwen could use more strength to deal with the strong enemies before him. Be it Gong Huang or Tung Huang, they both knew that it would not be easy to kill him. Or rather, the two of them did not expect to kill him. They only hoped to delay him. He had to suppress the power of destruction of the martial epoch. Hence, the longer it took, the more severe the consequences would be. Hence, he did not have much time left. Boom! 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 All sorts of battles became more and more intense. What a great martial monarch! I can't help but admire you. You have not cultivated for a long time, but you are already this strong. If you continue to grow, your future will be limitless. Why are you making a mistake? Tung Huang said with a loud laugh. He looked like he had victory in his grasp. It's still too early to say this. Yi Shiwen's expression was cold and emotionless. Tung Huang, who was in front of him, attacked repeatedly. With every wave of his hand, the primal chaos was torn apart and shattered. It was truly terrifying. At this moment, a seal flew out from Yi Shiwen's head. It was the martial sovereign seal. The revered martial seal flew up, and countless golden lights suddenly poured into it. This made the entire revered martial seal burst out with shocking rays of light and transformed into another Yi Shiwen. You used the golden light of virtue as your physical body, Tung Huang said in shock. How much golden light of virtue did you have to waste it like this? Just as he finished speaking, the Yi Shiwen in front of him disappeared. When he spoke again, Yi Shiwen had already appeared in front of Gong Huang. His fists were like two dragons as they punched out. Not good, it's a diversion. At this moment, Tang Huang suddenly realized that Yi Shiwen's real target was Gong Huang. Because Gong Huang kept attacking, Yi Shiwen couldn't concentrate on dealing with Tang Huang. If this continued, Yi Shiwen would be worn down by the two of them. Rather than injuring 10 fingers, it was better to break 1 finger. Everyone understood this logic. However, when he wanted to go and help, he was blocked by Yi Shiwen's golden body of virtue. This golden body of virtue was formed from countless golden lights of virtue. It was incomparably sturdy and not as weak as ordinary incarnations. It could even be said to be very difficult to deal with. Being entangled by this golden body of virtue, it was impossible for Tang Huang to escape in a short period of time. However, Gong Huang is still a sovereign realm expert. He won't be defeated so quickly, right? Tang Huang comforted himself. Gong Huang was a middle-stage sovereign realm expert. Moreover, Yi Shiwen was entangled by the martial epoch and couldn't use his full strength. This was their chance. However, he was shocked when he saw the situation on the other side. He had thought that the Bao Emperor would be able to block Yi Shiwen for a while. However, Yi Shiwen had defeated the Bao Emperor in the first place. Obviously, Gong Huang wasn't a match for Yi Shiwen in close combat. Although Gong Huang was proficient in all kinds of close combat martial arts and divine abilities, he was more proficient in archery and sniping from a long distance. However, he was now in front of him. If it was an ordinary person, it would be fine. However, this person was Yi Shiwen. He was a martial monarch and was proficient in 3,000 martial arts. In this aspect, it could be said that he had met an expert. In just 2 or 3 moves, Gong Huang was forced to retreat by Yi Shiwen. All of his defenses collapsed in an instant. Yi Shiwen's attacks were even faster. No matter how Gong Huang tried to escape, it was useless. No matter how he tried to increase the distance between them, Yi Shiwen would always be able to catch up. Yi Shiwen's movement technique was displayed incisively and vividly. Finally, Yi Shiwen seized the opportunity when Gong Huang retreated again and again. He blasted out a punch. This punch could only be described as terrifying and peerless. Before Yi Shiwen had become a sovereign realm, he was already terrifying enough. Not to mention now, after stepping into the sovereign realm, this punch of his was almost like the entire world was smashing down. This was a kind of cosmic wonder that was rarely seen since ancient times. This punch directly pierced through all of Gong Huang's defenses. All of Gong Huang's defenses collapsed in an instant. Then, Yi Shiwen's punch blasted into his body. Boom! Gong Huang's body flew out, and his entire body was blasted into pieces. This punch had pierced through his flesh, and the majestic power it carried caused his flesh to collapse. Yi Shiwen's entire body was burning with the golden light of virtue. He relied on the power of the golden light of virtue to forcibly restore his strength to the peak. Then he took a step forward, and his big foot suddenly stomped in the direction of Gong Huang. Gong Huang didn't even have time to react before he was directly trampled into pieces. Even his spirit was instantly ignited and turned into nothingness. Yi Shiwen, who had restored his strength to the peak, was this terrifying. He picked up the longbow, pulled the bowstring, and suddenly shot an arrow. Chapter 3881. Yi Shiwen drew his longbow and shot an arrow. It was even more powerful than the arrow that the Bao Emperor had shot a moment ago. The weapon spirit of the longbow manifested and wanted to resist Yi Shiwen. However, how could Yi Shiwen allow it to do as it wished? He shattered it on the spot, and all the resistance from the longbow disappeared. The arrow that was tens of millions of miles long tore through everything instantly and flew towards Yin Lord and Yang Lord. The two of them worked together and managed to suppress Qin Jun, who was held back by the collapse of the martial epoch. Yi Shiwen's arrow was like the Milky Way falling from the sky and struck Een Lord directly. Een Lord was completely caught off guard. Even he did not expect that an attack would cross the entire chaos space and sweep towards him. Or rather, he did not expect that Bao Emperor would be severely injured or even killed by Yi Shiwen in such a short period of time. At the same time, it was also because Yi Shiwen's arrow was too terrifying. Een Jun let out a blood-curdling scream, and his body instantly exploded. Although he was not killed directly, he was severely injured. As for Een Lord and Yang Lord, there was a gap in their joint attack, and they could not completely suppress Qin Jun like before. Qin Jun instantly felt the pressure on him decrease greatly. He could not be bothered to thank Yi Shiwen and hurriedly pounced towards Een Lord. As the saying went, it was better to break one than to injure all 10 fingers. Qin Jun understood this as well, and it was precisely because of this that he wanted to kill them all. Yang Lord also understood this and hurriedly went forward to stop them. In an instant, the entire chaos space turned into a terrifying battlefield for the two of them. After helping Qin Jun, Yi Shiwen didn't stay idle, because Teng Huang had already pounced on him, taking advantage of the moment when Yi Shiwen shot that arrow. He had already pounced over. Emperor Ting opened up his palms and punched out. Almost in an instant, the entire heaven and earth was torn apart, and the entire chaos was pierced through. In an instant, Emperor Teng's skills soared to a higher level, and he rushed to the late-stage ruler. When Yi Shiwen killed Bao Emperor just now, he already felt a huge sense of danger. Who would dare to underestimate Yi Shiwen now? Wouldn't that be courting death? It had been very difficult for him to deal with Yi Shiwen, even though he had the help of the Bao Emperor. Let alone now. He had to do his best. It would have been fine if he didn't participate, but since he did, he didn't have much time left. Emperor Ting's entire body was burning fiercely, and terrifying laws of the great Tao were burning as well. Yi Shiwen, on the other hand, took a step forward. Not to be outdone, he also clenched his fist and started fighting with Emperor Ting. Boom! The two fists set off a terrifying tide in the primal chaos, almost drowning everything. The brilliant divine light scattered, looking incomparably beautiful, but in the eyes of the experts of the various ancient eras, it was incomparably terrifying. Ha 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 ha, it's been a long time since I've had such a good fight. Yi Shiwen laughed out loud. In the chaos, his figure swept across and bombarded Teng Huang with punches. His entire body flickered with the golden light of virtue, making him look like a golden statue. In the chaos, he became the only source of illumination. The more he fought, the stronger he became, and the more terrifying he became. His entire aura rose, and every punch he threw was on par with Emperor Ting. However, different from Yi Shiwen, Emperor Ting's aura dissipated one after another. The strength that he forcibly raised was completely at a disadvantage when he met Yi Shiwen. He originally had the strongest physical body, so he could do whatever he wanted. Even the destructive power of the epic replacement couldn't hurt him at all. However, now that he met Yi Shiwen, he had completely met his nemesis. All these years, Yi Shiwen had refined countless golden lights of virtue into his body. He could be said to be invincible in the world, and he had no problem facing the terrifying destructive power of the era replacement. The more Emperor Ting fought, the more terrifying he felt. When he fought with Yi Shiwen, there were horrifying wounds appearing all over his body. His strength also varied from person to person. How much qi of virtue did he refine? The more Emperor Ting fought, the more terrifying he felt. Why did he feel that the golden lights of virtue on Yi Shiwen's body were free, and he could casually release a large amount of it? Facing such an opponent, no matter how he fought, he couldn't even move Yi Shiwen. Finally, when he was forced to this point, Emperor Ting suddenly turned into a horrifying giant snake, the ancestor of all snakes in the world, the horrifying Ting snake. His entire body emitted a shocking divine radiance, and he shuttled through the chaos at an extremely fast speed. The tail swept downwards at lightning speed. Any kind of attack was nothing in the face of this attack. Boom! Yi Shiwen raised his hand and directly blocked this horrifying attack. World of laws! Yi Shiwen shouted, and instantly his entire body turned into a horrifying giant that was billions of miles tall, and the entire chaos could see his terrifying existence. Compared to Emperor Teng's body, he was not any smaller. The two of them fought all the way into the depths of the chaos of the universe. The battle broke out in the chaos that was filled with terrifying destructive power. Martial monarch, you won't be able to hold on for long. No matter how hard you try, you can't save the fate of the entire martial era. Emperor Teng roared loudly. But at least it's enough to kill you. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. Many people hurriedly looked into the chaos. In the chaos, the battle between Yi Shiwen and Emperor Teng had already entered a white-hot stage. Facing Yi Shiwen, who had forcefully raised his strength to the peak, Emperor Teng gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Martial monarch, you've gone too far. Since you're like this, then don't blame me. Suddenly, Emperor Teng opened his bloody mouth, and in an instant, an incomparably huge formation appeared around Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, I'm not humiliating you by using this sky-devouring great formation to destroy you. Emperor Teng roared. Yi Shiwen saw that he was already in a horrifying formation. This formation was layered, and all kinds of horrifying attacks fell down like tides. Around this formation, there were actually 4 horrifying figures, and they were all Emperor Teng. No, those are clones. They're all clones. Yi Shiwen immediately realized that those were not his real body. But even if they were just clones, these clones looked extremely horrifying, because these clones were not created randomly. They were formed after countless years of refining, and their combat power was comparable to the real body, just like the clones formed by Yi Shiwen's golden light of virtue and the martial sovereign seal. This is a great formation that I've meticulously researched. No one has ever been able to escape from it. Using this great formation to send you to your grave is not a bad thing. Emperor Teng roared, and his huge snake face was incomparably cold. Countless murderous intents covered the sky and the earth, and were about to drown Yi Shiwen. Above Yi Shiwen's head, the martial sovereign seal released layers of defense, but even so, the murderous intents still pierced through many layers of defense. The layers of defense were constantly being repaired and pierced through again. Terrifying murderous intents were coming from all directions, and there was no way to escape. I once used this great formation to trap and kill a ruler, and now you'll be the second. Emperor Teng's eyes became colder, and he said, You still managed to escape. Then you're going against the heavens. Yi Shiwen let the murderous intents bombard him, and said, The level of this great formation is not high enough to kill me. On Yi Shiwen's body, the golden light of virtue burned again. In an instant, his aura became 10 times more terrifying and turned into a terrifying attack that pierced through the entire great formation. What? Emperor Teng's eyes widened, and he felt that this was impossible. However, Yi Shiwen's figure had already taken advantage of this gap and killed his way out of the great formation towards one of Emperor Teng's clones. Bang! The huge clone of Emperor Teng was directly pierced through by Yi Shiwen's punch. Yi Shiwen was equally terrifying. Boom! The huge clone of Emperor Teng exploded into pieces on the spot. Bang! 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 With lightning speed, Yi Shiwen destroyed the remaining 3 incarnations of Teng Huang. Although these incarnations had almost the same battle strength as the main body, their bodies were still not as strong as the main bodies. Even the real body was not a match for Yi Shiwen, let alone his clones. In just a moment, all of them were killed. With that, the monstrous formation vanished into thin air. How dare you kill my clones? Emperor Teng was enraged. Not only will I kill your clones, but I will also kill you. Yi Shiwen rushed to the front of Emperor Teng. A martial lord seal appeared in his hand. Bang! the martial lord's seal smashed down, and a huge crack appeared on Emperor Teng's huge head. Emperor Teng was in pain, and he retreated continuously. However, he could not escape at all. Yi Shiwen unleashed 3,000 attacks in an instant, and all 3,000 martial arts were unleashed in an instant. Boom! Emperor Teng screamed in pain, and his head exploded on the spot. Blood splattered everywhere. A small snake flew out from Emperor Teng's huge body, and it was trying to escape. It was Emperor Teng's primordial spirit. However, even in the chaos, it could not hide from Yi Shiwen's eyes. Yi Shiwen took a step forward, and with a stomp he crushed the small snake into pieces, and it completely turned into nothingness. Yet another peerless hegemon had fallen, just like that. Emperor Teng's huge body was also kept by Yi Shiwen, and it turned into a ball of blood essence, which he watered on the world tree. After being watered by the Dominator's blood essence, the world tree instantly became incomparably tall, and it was becoming more and more like the legendary world tree. Then, without saying anything, Yi Shiwen rushed to Qin Jun's battlefield. Chapter 3882. After beheading Teng Huang, Yi Shiwen flew towards Qin Jun's battlefield like an arrow. At this moment, Qin Jun was already fighting with Yin Lord and Yang Lord. Yin Lord was severely injured by Yi Shiwen's arrow just now, so he was already prepared and alert. Furthermore, he had to guard against Yi Shiwen's possible intervention at any time, so he could not do his best to deal with Qin Jun. Just now, Qin Jun had managed to achieve a stalemate. However, at the same time, Qin Jun was unable to concentrate his full strength. The destructive power that was emanating from the void was frantically crushing over at every moment. He was different from Yin Lord and Yang Lord. He only needed to take care of himself. He still had to suppress the entire martial epic, so he could not just take care of himself. Emperor Teng, Gong Emperor, Yin Lord, and Yang Lord saw this moment and came personally because they knew that Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun could not use their full strength. Yin Lord and Yang Lord were still trying their best to deal with Qin Jun. Yi Shiwen suddenly rushed into the battlefield, and in just a moment he was already in front of them. Even though the two of them had battle-hardened strength, they were still terrified. This was because Yi Shiwen's arrival meant that the Bao Emperor and the Teng Emperor had been annihilated on the other battlefield. This was the only way for Yi Shiwen to have the time to come here. They turned to look. Indeed, the other battlefield was already quiet. "Hurry up and leave!" Yin Lord shouted. "Isn't it a little too late to leave now?" Yi Shiwen sneered and said, unbeknownst to him, his figure had already appeared in front of Yin Jun. He blocked Yin Lord's escape route. "Martial Monarch, do you want to fight to the death with me?" Seeing that, Yin Monarch hurriedly roared, "A life and death struggle? With just you guys?" Yi Shiwen looked coldly at Yin Lord and said, an unimaginably terrifying aura erupted from Yi Shiwen's body. "I've already given you a chance. Since you chose to stand out, you must be prepared to pay the price. You won't die if you don't seek death. I think you should understand this logic." Yi Shiwen sneered and said, "Wu Lord is right. Since you're here, don't leave." Qin Jun sneered and said, taking advantage of the fact that his strength was suppressed to come and kill him. He was truly enraged. "Fight it out with them." Yin Lord roared and pounced towards Yi Shiwen, while the Yang Lord pounced towards Qin Lord, one on each side, stubbornly resisting. Boom! Yin Jun directly attacked Yi Shiwen. The Yin Qi turned into a huge dragon and pounced towards Yi Shiwen. The entire primal chaos was suppressed by this huge dragon and collapsed. Yin Jun was determined to fight to the death as soon as he arrived. He directly rushed towards Yi Shiwen's head. He had been forced to this extent by Yi Shiwen. Then he had nothing to fear. Since retreating was useless, he would fight. He had seen too many powerful enemies in his life. However, he had never bowed down to any of them. He had never admitted defeat. So, he had decided to fight against Yi Shiwen. This was a terrifying collision. Millions and millions of strands of divine radiance splashed out and swept out from the place where the two sides clashed. How terrifying was this attack! Amidst the endless divine radiance, Yishuin directly spread out his hands and suddenly tore apart the huge dragon formed by the endless Yin Qi. Countless laws exploded from Sun Jian's body. However, Yin Jun took advantage of this period of time to sublimate. All the life energy in his body was burning and turned into terrifying strength. The fear in his heart towards Yi Shiwen could be seen clearly. So he didn't hesitate at all and directly broke out, "Wu Lord, since you want me to die, then I'll drag you down with me." Boundless magic surged out of Yin Jun's body. An entire primal chaos shook. It was extremely terrifying. Yin Jun coldly looked at Yi Shiwen. Then he suddenly blasted his fist out. It was unknown how much chaotic energy in the world had been transformed into Yin and Yang energies. Then the Yin energy was controlled by him and blasted towards Yi Shiwen. "In the primal chaos, this is my home ground. Don't you know that the chaotic qi is formed by Yin and Yang qi? Choosing to fight with me here will be the biggest mistake in your life." Yi Shiwen's expression was cold and he didn't say a word. His body emitted endless golden light of merit and virtue. It actually stabilized the entire primal chaos. Yin Jun wanted to separate more Yin and Yang qi, but he had no way at all. It was as if the primal chaos was imprisoned by someone. What? How is this possible? How much merit and virtue do you have? Yin Jun turned pale with fright. He could have the confidence to fight against Yi Shiwen largely because the chaotic qi that could be seen everywhere in the primal chaos had become the biggest source of replenishment for him. However, he didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would suppress the chaotic qi and cause his plan to fail. After Yi Shiwen smashed the sky full of Yin Qi with a punch, he only let out a long roar. His body emitted endless divine radiance and rushed to the front of Yin Jun in one step. "Puchi!" Yin Jun let out a blood-curdling scream as he was hit by Yi Shiwen's attack. He had lost all his advantages at this moment. Yi Shiwen's punch had pierced through his chest. Yin Jun retreated again and again, coughing up large mouthfuls of blood. He was too aggrieved in this battle. He was one of the earliest rulers, and he had only seen many top powerhouses. Yi Shiwen, a junior who had just attained the Tao in this era, was nothing in his eyes. However, he was actually suppressed by Yi Shiwen now. How could he endure this? Yi Shiwen didn't intend to let him go. He rushed over again. "Martial monarch, you've gone too far." The Yin monarch roared, and the laws in his body shook. He turned into a divine rainbow that filled the sky and soared into the heavens. The entire primal chaos was shaken, and treasured splendor was emitted everywhere. Then he rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. "It's useless. Your ending today has already been decided," Yi Shiwen shouted. His eyes were cold and emotionless because he knew that he could not afford to relax at this moment. Otherwise, what would be destroyed would be none other than the entire martial epic. Boom! After Yin Jun rushed in front of Yi Shiwen, all his defenses were broken by Yi Shiwen's sword. Then his body was almost cut in half. Bang! 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 Yin Jun kept roaring, but it was of no use. Every strike would shatter him. His body would collapse, and his primordial spirit would also suffer heavy injuries. Yi Shiwen's attack was too terrifying. He had 3,000 martial arts. He could slash out countless attacks every second. 3,000 different martial arts attacks didn't have the same type. All of them fell on Yin Monarch's body. Yin Jun kept screaming. Finally, he was directly beaten by Yi Shiwen to the edge of the primal chaos. This was a terrifying battle that spanned across the entire primal chaos. The last move, Martial Monarch. "I will die, and you will die too," Yin Jun roared. The entire primal chaos collapsed and turned into a world of Yin Qi. It was an extremely terrifying scene. He was using an earth-shattering unique skill. Unimaginable, Yin Qi surged like the sea. The rules and magical powers exploded in an instant. In an instant, the entire river of time was pulled out by him. He intercepted a part of the power and blasted it towards Yi Shiwen. This was the ultimate attack. It involved the power of the entire time. In the entire primal chaos, no matter if it was the martial epoch or the ancient epoch, all the experts were shocked. They could clearly feel that the time in their epoch was affected by Yin Jun's peerless, absolute art. Affected by the power of time, time once again exerted its power on them. That rainbow-colored radiance drowned everything. Nothing could be seen. The blazing radiance drowned everything. Everyone opened their heavenly eyes one after another. They wanted to see how Yi Shiwen was doing. At that moment, a loud roar rang out. Then a treasured sword seemed to slash down from the end of time, directly slashing the terrifying power of time. Rumble. This terrifying power of time was directly smashed. Not a single bit was left. Then, Yi Shiwen's sword directly blasted on Yin Jun's body. It didn't stop at all. Bang! Yin Monarch exploded. However, he wasn't able to recover this time. That was because Yin Monarch's spirit had been blown up several times by Yi Shiwen just now. His spirit was already in tatters. He had already exhausted all of his strength to unleash that move to perish together with Yi Shiwen. Even if he wasn't killed by Yi Shiwen, it would be difficult for him to survive after using this move. In order to use such a terrifying attack, he paid a huge price. Now it was finally the time for the power of chaos to bite back. His body was grabbed by Yi Shiwen and integrated into the World Tree. The World Tree grew rapidly and truly became an extremely huge world. Yin Jun was finally killed. However, Yi Shiwen's current situation wasn't good either. This was because all sorts of power from the backlash surged towards him. That was the power of the era's destruction. If Yi Shiwen wanted to suppress the martial Dao era, he had to go against them. On the other side of the battlefield, Qin Jun finally killed the Yang Lord. However, he also paid a price. His entire body exploded. He wasn't severely injured by the Yang Lord, but by the power of destruction of the martial Dao era. After killing the Yin Lord and the Yang Lord, Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun immediately returned to suppress the entire martial Dao era. The two of them were like two stabilizing pillars. They firmly fixed this terrifying scene of destruction. On one side was the power of destruction. On the other side was the power of life. The two sides were competing with each other endlessly. Gradually, it became more and more terrifying. Some signs of destruction appeared in the martial Dao era. Mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. The universe was chaotic. The sun, moon, and stars were all collapsing. 100 years, 200 years, 300 years. This terrifying destruction went on for 100,000 years. 1/3 of the martial Dao era was destroyed. However, just when everyone felt that this destruction would never stop, the power of destruction suddenly disappeared. It came quickly and disappeared quickly as well. It disappeared without a trace in an instant. Chapter 3883. 100,000 years. The great calamity that everyone thought would never end had come to an end in just 100,000 years. It came suddenly and disappeared suddenly. This also proved many people's guesses. This destructive power wasn't undefeatable, and it wouldn't always exist. It was like it was programmed. When the time came, it would automatically come and destroy everything. In the past 100,000 years, the experts had been terrified at every moment. It was like they could be destroyed at any moment. Even when Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun presided over the martial epoch, they were still in a precarious situation. In the past 100,000 years, everyone had seen Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun vomit blood more than once or twice. In the beginning, they even suffered from the backlash of the destructive power, causing their bodies to explode. Later on, they would vomit blood from time to time. This made it hard to believe that nothing in the martial epic could survive. After all, there had never been such a miracle since ancient times. Not a single epic could survive forever. However, this time, the martial epic relied on the unity of the entire martial epic to block the destructive power of the epic. This was something that had never happened before. The martial epic was too powerful. It had a longer peak period than the other epics. This allowed the martial epic to have 10 times more half-step rulers than the other ancient epics. Aside from Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun's hard work, the half-step rulers and Heavenly Venerate's hard work also played an important role in the martial epic surviving this great calamity. They actually did it. That's impossible. Isn't the epic replacement the righteous path of the world? How did they do it? I don't believe it either. However, this is the truth. Does this mean that the martial epic will continue to exist forever? 100,000 years later, the ancient epics in the primal chaos immediately sensed that the great calamity had passed. However, what shocked them was that the martial epic had not been destroyed. After the great calamity of this epic, many people discovered that the shackles suppressing them had disappeared. Many people felt like they had returned to the best of times. Their cultivation speed soared. Many people broke through their cultivation realms. Within the world, an indescribable law was being born. It was a law that had never been born before. Because of these laws, a group of incomparably powerful creatures were born. These were all born as gods, powerful figures born from the power of the laws of heaven and earth. Among them, there were even terrifying existences that were born as imperial emperors and heavenly lords. These were the innate gods that would be born at the birth of every epic. They were extremely terrifying. They were often powerful rulers at the beginning of the epic, and their bloodlines would be passed down in the epic. Their divine abilities and great techniques would also be passed down in the epic. However, this epic was different. When the new innate life forms were born because of the laws, the martial epic had not ended yet. Thus, these powerful beings who were born to be kings met a tragedy. Before the martial epic's experts could make a move, they killed or captured as slaves. Many of the law origins that could not materialize in time were snatched away and refined by the martial epic's experts. To think that these strong innate life forms had fallen to such a level. If the martial Lord Yishuin had not issued a decree at this time, stating that the life forms of every epic had the right to live and forbade them from being exterminated at will, all the life forms born in the new epic would have been slaughtered. At this time, the martial lord and the Qin lord worked together to refine a world at the periphery of the fortune realm. They placed these strong innate life forms that had just been born or had yet to be born in there. That was practically the entire process of the birth of a new epic. It would not be affected by the martial epic, and it could develop into a brand new, never-before-seen civilized world. Even so, these new laws still permeated every corner of the martial epic. As a result, new cultivation methods were born. Both martial monarch and Qin monarch passed down the cultivation methods of the new age. Given the two's strength and cultivation, they were the first to comprehend the new laws. Hence, after they passed down their cultivation techniques, it immediately caused a cultivation craze in the martial epic. The grand magic even spread to the new era's quarantine zone. The Sciention life forms that were born under the new magical laws were like fish in water. In just 1,000,000 years, there were already peak experts, empyreans, emperors, and even a half-step ruler. Such speed dumbfounded the experts of the martial epic. Such speed was simply like flying. The first life forms born in every epic were doted on by the world. With the protection of the world's luck, they could grow the fastest. In the legends of every epic, the strongest were the horrifying existences born at the beginning of the world. Most epics that focused on magic skills were like this. The earlier the epic, the more terrifying the life forms born. However, epics like the martial epic, which focused on cultivation, were the opposite. True experts would only appear in the later epics. This was because the more perfect the cultivation system and theories were, the more powerful experts they could give birth to. Until now, everyone seemed to have finally accepted the fact that they had survived until the next epoch. Of course, this process was not completely unscathed. However, compared to the fragmentation of the ancient epochs, it was much better. The old epoch did not break, but the new epoch was quietly born in the old epoch, like an old tree sprouting new buds. This was a brand new model, one that no one had experienced before. The epochs did not necessarily repel each other. They could merge and coexist. The people of the martial epoch and the people of the ancient epochs were watching. It wasn't until an earth-shattering event happened that the entire primal chaos was shocked. In this great calamity, the ancient epochs could no longer hold on. They had weak foundations in the first place. After hearing about the great calamities of a few epochs, it looked like they could no longer hold on. This time, they were finally going to fall apart. However, what surprised everyone was that this ancient epoch made a last-ditch effort. They actually sided with the martial epoch. They sided with the martial epoch and merged their epoch with the martial epoch. The person who handled this was Yi Shiwen. By relying on the power of the martial epoch, this ancient epoch regained its vigor. Furthermore, this ancient epoch sided with the martial epoch, making the great Tao of the martial epoch richer and more prosperous. This was equivalent to a win-win situation. For a time, this matter shocked the entire primal chaos epoch. This matter completely changed the mindset of the ancient epoch and the current epoch. They could only be enemies and kill each other. It was not that no one in the past had thought of cooperating with the current epoch and the ancient epoch. However, no one had been able to do it. However, all this was happening in the martial epoch. Many people wondered if this meant that the martial epoch was going to become an unprecedented great age. Now, every step the martial epoch took was unprecedented. Every step it took created history, reaching a realm that no one had ever reached before. After the first ancient epoch sided with the martial epoch and gained a new life, more and more ancient epochs started to side with the martial epoch. This made the martial epoch more prosperous and more experts appeared. They grew stronger and stronger. This was already a terrifying deterrent to those ancient epochs. Not every ancient epoch faced destruction. Not every ancient epoch's experts were willing to go to the martial epoch and listen to the arrangements of others. After all, in the original ancient epoch, there were people who could summon the wind and summon the rain. They were indomitable existences. However, in the martial epoch, they became ordinary. This was because there were too many peak experts in the current martial epoch. They were too horrifying. And just like that, the new era quietly descended. Tens of millions of years had already passed. Those powerful sentient life forms of the new era, perhaps because of internal strife, or because of cultivation deviation or various other reasons, all died or were injured. What replaced them were the latecomers who came later. The martial epoch's integration with the martial epoch deepened. With the addition of the other ancient epochs, the martial epoch was unprecedentedly powerful and prosperous. On this day, the martial monarch Yi Shiwen, who was regarded as the sky of the martial epoch, finally came out of closed-door cultivation. As he came out, boundless multicolored light and purple qi covered the entire martial epoch. All the life forms sensed Yi Shiwen's exit. Lord Martial Monarch, you may live forever. Countless life forms prostrated on the ground, not daring to raise their heads. Before that person, no matter what level of existence, they had to lower their noble heads, not daring to show any disrespect. Even the experts of the many ancient epochs in the primal chaos did not dare to show any disrespect. Yi Shiwen stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Since the birth of the new epoch, he had been in closed-door cultivation. In the blink of an eye, tens of millions of years had passed. It was true that there was no time in cultivation. During these tens of millions of years, his cultivation had also improved greatly. He had forcefully preserved the martial epoch. It was a difficult process, but now he had finally reaped some rewards. He had advanced from the late sovereign realm to the peak sovereign realm in one go. He had completely stood at the peak of countless epochs. He no longer had to worry about sneak attacks from the sovereigns in the mysterious place. It's time to put an end to this. Chapter 3884. After Yi Shiwen came out of seclusion, he didn't charge into the mysterious place immediately. He waited for Qin Jun to come out of seclusion. Qin Jun was his ally. Just like that, they waited for 1,000,000 years. During that 1,000,000 years, the entire world had undergone a huge change. The laws of the world had become even more lenient, and even more experts had appeared. What shocked everyone the most was that after Qin Jun and Martial Monarch, another ruler appeared in the martial epoch. This time, the one who became a ruler was none other than the current Middle Heavenly Venerate. A Middle Heavenly Venerate was already an outstanding figure among the many half-step rulers, although he couldn't compare to Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun, who became a ruler at a time when it was completely unsuitable for them to become rulers. The Middle Heavenly Venerate was already a ruler. However, after countless years, a new epoch had begun. The world was suitable for the birth of rulers again. Furthermore, the current martial epoch was more than twice as strong as it was before the Great Apocalypse. That was to say, Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun had expanded the pool of the entire martial epoch. It could accommodate even more rulers. Under such circumstances, a Middle Heavenly Venerate achieved Tao. After achieving Tao, he was no longer the vice-ruler of the Fortune God dynasty, but called himself Purple Myrtle Heavenly Monarch. However, he didn't break away from the Fortune God dynasty system. This system had been polished for countless years and was already very stable. It was hard to break, but there was no need to. Just like how Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun didn't establish their own sects after achieving Tao, because there was no need. It wasn't that they didn't establish their own sects or that they considered themselves beneath Qin Jun. Most of the time, there was just no need. However, Purple Myrtle Heavenly Monarch still left the Fortune God capital and established the Purple Myrtle sect, spreading his own great Tao. As for the Fortune God dynasty, they chose another half-step ruler to inherit the position of Middle Heavenly Venerate. Too many things had happened in the last 1,000,000 years. Because the great Taos of heaven and earth permitted it, the half-step sovereigns saw hope. They wanted to affirm their Tao and become sovereigns in this new age. Only by becoming a ruler could one become the ruler of the chaos epoch. In the end, a half-step ruler was just a half-step ruler. Finally, on this day, Qin Jun also came out of seclusion. When he came out, his aura also soared into the sky. A terrifying scene that had never been seen before was released. A green lotus bloomed in the chaos, and Qin Jun slowly appeared within it. "Friend, it's time to put an end to this." Yi Shiwen indifferently said, "Yes, it is time to end this. If the martial epoch wants to exist forever, this is unavoidable." Qin Jun said. Yi Shiwen called little Yue over and told her to take care of the heavenly court. This battle would be dangerous, but he had to go. This was for the sake of all the living beings of the martial epoch, as well as for his Tao of eternal life. Before the two of them left, Heavenly Lord Zi Wei came out of seclusion. She looked at the two and said, "Fellow Taoists, do you need my help?" "There's no need. You stay here. If something happens to us, at least we still have you to guard the martial epoch. Furthermore, it's not like we don't have helpers in this mysterious place. The Fortune Heavenly Lord is still there to restrain the strong enemies." Qin Jun shook his head and sent the Purple Myrtle Heavenly Lord back. Both of them knew what kind of terrifying battle awaited them. The Purple Myrtle Heavenly Lord would play a huge role in guarding the martial epoch, but if she were to get involved in the battle in the mysterious place, she might not be able to do much. After all, he had just attained the Tao, and it had only been a short time. Meanwhile, the rulers in the mysterious place were terrifying existences who had lived through at least one epoch, and there were many who had lived through more than 10 epochs. The two of them advanced into the primal chaos. At this time, many of the ancient epochs were shocked. The two of them had finally come out, and this time it was clear that they were heading for the eternal sage and the primordial heavenly lord in the mysterious place. This was going to be another shocking battle, a battle against the Tao. The primordial sacred land and the eternal sacred land were trembling under the pressure of the two rulers, Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun. They could not even speak. But neither Yi Shiwen nor Qin Jun had any intention of destroying these two sacred lands. At their level of cultivation, it was impossible for them to be so narrow-minded. Although the two sacred lands had been founded by the eternal sage and the primordial heavenly lord, over the countless years, more than one ruler had occupied them, leaving behind their own teachings. It would be a pity to destroy them. Moreover, no one could help them in this battle. Even destroying the two sacred lands would be of no help. The two of them reached the depths of the primal chaos and finally made their move. The two of them glanced at each other, then made their move. Both of them unleashed their most terrifying attacks. Rumble. In an instant, heaven and earth split apart, and the entire primal chaos was torn apart. All of the ancient epochs of the primal chaos were dumbfounded. The two of them were not going the usual way, not through the eternal gate or the primordial divine bridge. They were going to carve their own way to the mysterious place, but the two of them did indeed have the strength to do so. Back then, the primordial heavenly lord and the eternal sage were probably just as strong. The entire primal chaos was torn apart, and endless divine light burst forth. The mysterious place was blasted open again. The half-step rulers could only wait for that one opportunity every epoch. But for Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun, that wasn't the case. They were strong enough. The two of them fought their way into the mysterious place. Their eyes blazed like torches, and as far as the eye could see, all of the secrets of the mysterious place could no longer be hidden from the two of them. This was the second time Yi Shiwen had come to the mysterious place. The first time, he had only been a half-step ruler. Compared to now, he was more than 100 times stronger. One powerful aura after another in the mysterious place was startled awake. These were the many sovereigns in the mysterious place. They were all shocked by Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun's terrifying energy and Tao. What? There's actually someone who can achieve such a terrifying Tao outside. And there's two of them at the same time? A ruler exclaimed. But Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun didn't even look at them. They continued to pass through the mysterious place. Eternal Sage, primordial heavenly lord, I'm coming to kill you, Yi Shiwen roared. The entire mysterious land was trembling. At that moment, a figure finally appeared. It was a man of unmatched elegance. He was tall and slender, and he looked extremely handsome. Divine splendor radiated from his body, making him seem like a god of creation. Eternal Sage, Yi Shiwen spat out the man's name. This man was the Eternal Sage. He'd seen his portrait in the eternal sacred land before. On the other side, another figure with a terrifying aura appeared. It was a man of unparalleled stature. He looked a little rough, but the entire primal chaos was under his control. Primordial, heavenly lord, Yi Shiwen said, looking at the figure. Very good. Both of you are here. Yi Shiwen said coolly. I'll kill both of you at the same time to avoid any future troubles. You want to kill us? Ha ha ha, what a joke. The primordial heavenly lord roared with laughter, as if he'd heard the most ridiculous joke in the world. It's finally time to end everything. A terrifying and monstrous aura suddenly swept out from the depths of the mysterious place. A figure flew over rapidly. His body carried boundless power of creation, as if he could open a new world. Fortune creation, heavenly lord, Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun said in unison. Yes, this was the fortune creation, heavenly lord who'd come from the depths of the mysterious place. He'd sensed Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun's presence. In fact, this wasn't the first time Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun had come to the mysterious place. However, neither of them had seen the fortune creation Heavenly Lord before. They'd been too weak at the time. People as weak as they weren't qualified for him to meet them. He was only keeping the Eternal Holy Monarch and the others busy so that the Eternal Holy Monarch and the others wouldn't be able to kill the two of them. His hard work had finally paid off. Fortune creation, Heavenly Lord, you haven't asked me if you want to go over. An even colder voice rang out. A figure as large as a mountain stood in front of the fortune creation, Heavenly Lord. This person had scales all over his body, and his demonic aura soared into the sky. However, he wasn't sinister at all. Instead, he was magnanimous and magnanimous. The demonic path had reached an unimaginable level in his hands. Even Yemo, the ancestor of the demonic path in the current martial epoch, looked exceptionally small in front of this person. He was extremely powerful in the demonic path. The demon ancestor, Yi Shiwen, instantly guessed the identity of this person. This person shouldn't be anyone else. He was the demon ancestor who'd once dominated the demonic epoch. Yi Shiwen instantly understood. No wonder the fortune creation, Heavenly Lord, hadn't come out after entering the mysterious place. He'd been entangled by 3 experts of the same level. Even if the fortune creation, Heavenly Lord, had extraordinary abilities, he wouldn't have been able to escape. At this moment, the 3 of them had clearly formed an alliance. From what Qin Jun had said about the primal chaos green lotus, it wasn't hard to figure out that the Eternal Sage and the Ancient Sage had fought over the primal chaos green lotus. Clearly, their relationship wasn't that close. However, now they had formed an alliance. In that case, it was clear who this alliance was targeting: the martial epoch. The 3 rulers of the martial epoch were clearly on the same side. The martial epoch was their foundation. As long as the martial epoch wasn't destroyed, they would have endless possibilities. Even if they hadn't seen the fortune creation, Heavenly Lord, before, they would have immediately decided to form an alliance. And now, in the mysterious place, 2 great factions had been formed in an instant. However, there weren't just these rulers in the mysterious place. Many powerful auras were faintly discernible in the surroundings of the battlefield. Chapter 3885. These peak sovereigns were not the only ones in this mysterious place. There were also many sovereigns from past epochs. Now, the confrontation between the 6 primes of the 2 factions had startled these sovereigns, so they surrounded Shaoqin. These sovereigns could be said to be unprecedented. Every one of them had once ruled over an epoch. Now that they surrounded Shaoqin, how horrifying was this situation? However, Yi Shiwen remained calm. This was not the first time he had been surrounded by so many sovereigns, so there was nothing to fear. Fellow Taoists, the martial epoch intends to defy the heavens and cut off our path of life. Are you all going to sit back and do nothing? The Eternal Sage shouted. Upon hearing this, many people indeed felt somewhat restless. It would have been fine if it were anything else. However, if the martial epoch wanted to continue living forever, it would cut off their path of life. This was because even sovereigns could not truly survive the endlessly changing epochs. It was just that their lifespans were much longer than regular life forms. Many people cast their gazes on Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun. Yi Shiwen did not panic. He only stood upright with his hands behind his back. Then he looked at the sovereigns and said, "My martial epoch has already succeeded. We have found a true path to eternal life. Isn't this what everyone dreams of? We do not have to experience the changing of epochs. We do not have to worry about dying of old age. We cultivators cultivate so bitterly, standing out from billions of life forms. What is it for? To seek the Tao? That is just one of the reasons. The most important thing is not dying. The 6 paths of reincarnation are fake. There is no afterlife. If one falls, there is nothing left. I believe everyone here is clearer than me on this point. However, that is your martial epoch, isn't it? What does it have to do with us? A strong sovereign asked. This is indeed a path opened by my martial epic. However, everyone can join in as well. Assimilate into my martial epic, and you can obtain eternal life. It is much better than living in fear day and night. Yi Shiwen said indifferently. If we join the martial epoch, we have to lower our heads to them. Does fellow Taoist want to live under someone else's roof? As long as we break the martial epoch and obtain the luck of the world and the great Tao origin, given the strength of the martial epoch, we can live for at least several epochs. The ancient sage shouted. And then, search for the next epoch, destroy the next epoch, extend his life, and bitterly wait for the birth of a perfect epoch that he didn't even know existed? When that time comes, won't you all have to join that perfect era? You will have to start all over again. What's the difference? I don't like to place my hopes on the illusory bodies of others. Instead of waiting, it's better to create a perfect era with me. Yi Shiwen said faintly. Many of the sovereigns began to stir. Both sides' words made sense, and many of the sovereigns had their own ideas. Some were unwilling to live under someone else's roof, while others were unwilling to continue waiting like this. Fellow Taoists, this battle is unavoidable. If you leave now, I can let bygones be bygones. But since you've decided to stay, I'll have to ask all of you to make a decision. Are you going to stand on my side, or are you going to stand on their side? A battle to determine life and death. A battle to determine the outcome. Yi Shiwen said indifferently. On the other side, the eternal sage also said, Today is the day we fight to the death with the martial epoch. If you are not a friend, you are an enemy. If you are not a friend, you will be eliminated. The eternal sage threatened forcefully. Everyone knew that others could lower their heads and join the martial epoch, but they could not. Hence, they could only fight to the death with the martial epoch's 3 sovereigns. Both sides issued strong threats, enraging the sovereigns. They understood that both sides were unparalleled on this issue. The eternal sage sovereign also issued a threat. They could either stand on his side and eliminate these martial epoch primes. Otherwise, after the eternal sage sovereign eliminated these martial epoch primes, it would be the sovereign's turn. On the other side, Yi Shiwen also sent out a signal that he was either an enemy or a friend. After the martial epoch wiped out all the enemies, they would conquer the mysterious land and truly unify the world. There was no way these people would try to smooth things over. The 2 sides weren't trying to push these sovereigns over to each other's side. They just wanted to make one thing clear. They weren't going to allow these sovereigns to watch from the sidelines and reap the benefits. Suddenly, the atmosphere of the entire mysterious place became heavy. After pondering for a long time, many people began to make their own decisions. At this moment, they had no choice but to make their choice. None of the 6 great supremes was someone they couldn't contend against. They were already standing at the peak of the ruler domain. Although they felt sullen, they also understood that it was time to determine the victor and the loser. It was time to end the chaotic situation in this world. Finally, someone made a move. He stood behind the eternal sage sovereign. Soon, after this person, there was a second and then a third. Everyone made their choice. It was basically a tie. Some people didn't believe Yi Shiwen and didn't want to lower their heads. However, there were also people who weren't willing to wait like this forever. They were willing to establish an eternal epoch with their own hands. Since that's the case, the situation is clear. Yi Shiwen shouted, Fellow Taoists, please lend me your strength to crush them and conquer the world. Kill. Many top powerhouses behind Yi Shiwen shouted in succession. The sovereigns behind the eternal sage sovereign were not to be outdone. They released their strongest auras. Kill them and divide the martial epoch. In that instant, the eternal sage sovereign made his move. A rain of light instantly burst out. Those were the terrifying light of the laws, and they immediately bombarded Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen made his move and clashed fiercely with the eternal sage sovereign. This was the start of a great battle. This was a terrifying battle between sovereigns. Dozens of sovereigns attacked at the same time. Both sides were evenly matched, which was why it was so terrifying. Yi Shiwen faced the Eternal Sage Sovereign, while Qin Jun attacked the Eternal Sage Sovereign. The grudge between the Fortune Creation Heavenly Monarch and the Demon Ancestor, which had been entangled for many years, erupted at this moment. The Fortune Creation Heavenly Monarch had been fighting 1 against 3 over the years. It had been too difficult for him. Fortunately, the 3 of them weren't actually united. They rarely attacked him at the same time, and it was mostly 1 against 1. Among the 3 of them, the Demon Ancestor had attacked him the most times. Behind the 2 sides, the sovereigns were also clashing. They all understood that there was no way out. If they couldn't defeat the other party, they would be the ones to die. Since they had made their decision, they wouldn't look left and right anymore. At this moment, Yi Shiwen, who was being targeted by the Eternal Sage Sovereign, suddenly attacked the other sovereigns who were charging at him. He threw out a ball of lightning source power. Rumble! A terrifying explosion occurred in an instant, and the entire mysterious place collapsed. The sovereigns on the Eternal Sage Monarch's side were caught off guard and were hit by the explosion. Several sovereigns were killed on the spot, and a dozen or so sovereigns were severely injured. The situation of the sovereigns' battlefield immediately reversed, and the martial epics side gained the upper hand. When the martial epics sovereigns saw this, their morale soared. On the other side, the Eternal Sage sovereigns' morale plummeted. This was a trump card that Yi Shiwen had prepared for a long time. He had completely infused the power of the heavenly tribulation into it. Moreover, it wasn't just a single heavenly tribulation. He had fused both the heavenly tribulation and the heavenly tribulation when he was a half-step sovereign. Yi Shiwen had originally done this to guard against a sneak attack from the Eternal Sage Sovereign and the others. Back then, Yi Shiwen had been too weak. Only by preparing this trump card could he deal with them. However, there was no need for it now. How dare you! When the Eternal Sage Sovereign saw that his side had instantly fallen into a disadvantage, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. Then he summoned a gigantic door from the void and ruthlessly pressed down on Yi Shiwen. Rumble! This gigantic door was the Gates of Eternity. However, this Gates of Eternity could do nothing to Yi Shiwen. A gigantic tree appeared on Yi Shiwen's body. That big tree was as big as the entire world. It was protecting Yi Shiwen inside it, and he couldn't be invaded by anything. The World Tree. The World Tree has fallen into your hands. The Eternal Sage Sovereign's eyes widened. Yi Shiwen's golden body of virtue was already very difficult to break. With the World Tree's existence, it was practically impossible to break through Yi Shiwen's defenses. The World Tree was too horrifying. It was said that it was the starting point of all worlds and all epochs. Therefore, no matter what kind of attacks or laws of the Great Tao, they would be frozen in place. It could be said that as long as the World Tree existed, all magical techniques and laws of the world would be useless. It was no wonder that Yi Shiwen had dared to so confidently charge into this mysterious place. There was such a barrier. However, hadn't the World Tree been destroyed a long time ago? Even if some seedlings had survived, they shouldn't have been able to grow to such a complete form. However, there was no time for him to think too much about this. This was because Yi Shiwen was already charging towards him. Die. The Eternal Sage Sovereign wasn't an ordinary person either. He used the Gates of Eternity as his defense. Then, he wielded a long saber and charged towards Yi Shiwen. Rumble! A terrifying collision erupted in an instant. Chapter 3886. The Eternal Sage's aura soared to its limit. He was different from the heavenly monarchs that Yi Shiwen had faced in the past. He was so powerful that it was almost unimaginable. This was the first time Yi Shiwen had faced a peak dominator. He was an existence that had reached the pinnacle of his domain. He was flawless and flawless. If Yi Shiwen had encountered the eternal sage in the past, he would have died without a doubt. But now, Yi Shiwen had the strength to stand on equal footing with him. Boom! 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 A terrifying battle broke out between both sides. The world tree transformed behind Yi Shiwen and collided with the eternal gate many times. Yi Shiwen released the revered martial seal in his hand. It had already transformed into the martial monarch seal. Its might was boundless. It could create the world, and it could also destroy the world. The current him had also reached a certain level of power. The martial lord seal continued to blast at the eternal sage, but was blocked by the long saber in his mouth. The two peerless magic tools continued to collide in the void, collapsing and annihilating everything. Yi Shiwen also took advantage of this gap and stepped out. He pinched a seal with his hand and turned it into the martial monarch seal technique. His hand turned into a seal and then smashed it down in one breath. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist punched through the void with his other hand and landed heavily on the eternal sage's body. The eternal saint monarch continued to conjure up various techniques and blasted them in Yi Shiwen's direction. Both sides had countless techniques, and in this terrifying exchange, an unimaginably dazzling immortal light burst out. "It's no use, martial lord. You can't defeat me." The eternal sage was protected by the eternal gate, so he was fearless and fearless. "Do you think I can't break your eternal gate?" Yi Shiwen sneered. He rushed in front of the eternal sage. Both sides unleashed many techniques at each other, but they had no scruples because they were both protected by treasures. The eternal gate was a treasure that the eternal sage had refined for many years. It could be said to be both offensive and defensive. It was unimaginably powerful. Boundless Gungjin ancestral qi manifested in his hand, and then it swept out in one breath, directly sweeping a huge hole in the terrifyingly powerful eternal gate. The Gung metal ancestral qi was invincible. It was one of the strongest treasures that had been bred in the entire Gung metal era. At this moment, in Yi Shiwen's hands, it erupted with unimaginably terrifying power. Impossible. The eternal holy sage could only watch helplessly as a huge hole appeared in the eternal gate. Yi Shiwen used this hole to kill his way to the eternal holy sage. It wasn't as if Yi Shiwen was right in front of him, but was actually countless eras away. Martial monarch seal. Yi Shiwen's hand transformed into a mountain-like, terrifying ribbon seal and fiercely smashed down. Bang! The eternal saint sage was severely injured in an instant. His entire body was almost torn apart. He coughed up blood as he retreated. He was completely suppressed by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, who had fought hundreds of battles, naturally wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. He directly crushed his opponent and ruthlessly suppressed him. After losing the upper hand, the eternal saint sage was already at a disadvantage. Now that he was severely injured, he was even less able to display his true combat strength. The battle lasted for 10 days and 10 nights. Yi Shiwen finally gained the upper hand. He used the world tree to suppress this side of the world. At the same time, he also suppressed the eternal saint sage. There was no way for him to escape. In the end, Yi Shiwen killed him with a punch. This punch pierced through the eternal saint sage, and at the same time, completely ignited the eternal saint sage's immortal spirit and burned it to ashes. This terrifying battle finally came to an end. Although it took some time in the process, it was worth it. Yi Shiwen was almost unharmed when he killed the eternal saint sage. Yi Shiwen, who had the world tree, was almost invincible. No one could destroy the world tree, and no one could defeat him. He put away the eternal saint sage's corpse. On the other side, the battle between Qin Jun and the Eternal Heaven Monarch was also coming to an end. Qin Jun, who had the green lotus of chaos on his back, held a long sword in his hand. His swordsmanship was divine, and every strike of his sword shook the entire mysterious place. The eternal heaven monarch was no match for him. Even with the eternal divine bridge, he couldn't stop Qin Jun's advance. He was beaten back again and again. In the end, Qin Jun chopped off his head with his sword, ending his path, his glory, and his everything. Qin Jun's green robes were stained with blood. He wasn't unscathed in the process, but he recovered with great magic power. Now, there was only one person left on the battlefield, and that was the battle between the Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch and the Demon Ancestor. The battle between the Demon Ancestor and the Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch had also reached a white-hot stage. At this time, the Demon Ancestor suddenly realized that his allies, the Eternal Saint Sage and the Eternal Saint Sage, had been defeated and killed. He was the only one left, and it was this momentary distraction that gave the Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch an opportunity. The Fortune Creation Heaven Palm struck the Demon Ancestor's body, piercing him and seriously injuring him. In the distance, the Fortune Creation Heaven Map flew over and stunned the Demon Ancestor. Seeing Yi Shiwen and Qin Jun coming to surround him, the Demon Ancestor couldn't help but smile miserably. I, the Demon Ancestor, have been strong all my life and have never been weaker than anyone. I never thought that I would fall here today. Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch, I regret not killing you first. Even if I have to pay a price, it's worth it. The Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch sneered. You should have known that this day would come. What kind of person was the Demon Ancestor? He naturally wasn't willing to die without a fight. He wanted to fight to the death, but he still couldn't escape from Yi Shiwen, Qin Jun, and the Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch. The Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch had beaten him half to death, and then he was punched through by Yi Shiwen. Finally, his head was cut off by Qin Jun's sword, and his spirit was ignited. In the end, he died completely. The battle finally came to an end. With the death of the three great supremes, the powerful sovereigns who followed the Eternal Saint Sage, the Eternal Saint Sage and the Demon Ancestor also couldn't escape death. This was a great battle between the two factions. They couldn't afford to be lenient. Although Yi Shiwen felt that it was a pity that they had cultivated for billions of years and experienced countless hardships to obtain their current cultivation, he didn't show any mercy when it was time to make his move. As Yi Shiwen, Qin Jun, and the Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch joined the battle, the sovereigns who had low morale in the first place finally couldn't hold on any longer. They collapsed on the spot and were slaughtered. This mysterious land became a horrifying place where the corpses of countless sovereigns were buried. The news of the martial epic's three great supremes' complete victory shook the entire primal chaos. At the same time, many people understood that this battle was the one that would decide the world. After this, no one could stop the martial epic from unifying the world. Sure enough, after the news spread, the sovereigns also announced that they would join the martial epic. The entire world was in an uproar, especially when the ancient epics governed by the sovereigns chose to join the martial epic, rapidly strengthening the entire martial epic. As for the epics that stood against Yi Shiwen, their heavenly venerables had already fallen. Now they felt like the sky was collapsing. Now that the martial epic was becoming stronger and stronger, it was about to unify the world and realize the eternal epic in the modern world. As for those epics that stood against Yi Shiwen and were about to be wiped out, they were incomparably terrified. They quickly sent a representative to the martial epic to ask for forgiveness. However, to their surprise, Yi Shiwen didn't have any intention of killing them. On the contrary, he allowed them to join the martial epic. Of course, their treatment couldn't be compared to the ancient epics that joined at the beginning, but it was still better than being wiped out. To Yi Shiwen, Qin Jun, and the Fortune Creation Heaven Monarch, these ancient epics that didn't even have sovereigns were no threat at all. Whether they were wiped out or not was just a matter of turning their hands. It didn't matter at all. There were no other epics in the world, only the martial epic. They had finally completed a glorious undertaking that no one in the past and no one in the future would be able to repeat. This had turned the martial epic into an epic that would last forever. As long as all living beings managed to corroborate their Tao, they could transcend beyond the 3 realms and the 5 elements. There would be no sudden, world-destroying calamities. Or rather, even if there were, with the strength of the martial epic's 3 primes and the many sovereigns that joined them, they could suppress it. Time passed day by day. In the blink of an eye, another epoch replaced the martial epoch. However, this time, the people of the martial epoch no longer panicked. Compared to the previous epoch, the martial epoch this time was much stronger. The various sovereigns, half-step sovereigns, and heavenly venerates worked together to stabilize the entire martial epoch, stabilizing it. Furthermore, with the 3 primes making a move, they quickly stabilized this horrifying calamity. Even more types of natural laws appeared, and even more sentient life forms appeared. It was exactly the same as when the last great era was born. However, this time the various factions were already experienced and had a tacit understanding. They just had to deal with it the same way as last time. As the epochs changed, 10 epochs passed in the blink of an eye. The martial epoch was unprecedentedly strong. Since ancient times, there had never been another epoch stronger than the martial epoch. On this day, one of the 3 primes, the martial monarch Yi Shiwen, suddenly came out of closed-door cultivation. He let out a startling roar, and an incredibly terrifying might instantly enveloped the entire martial epoch. This startled everyone. A figure flew out of the martial epoch, flying to the edge of the universe. It was Yi Shiwen. At this moment, he seemed to have merged with the entire primal chaos. Every move he made contained the charm of the great Tao. At the edge of the primal chaos, an old man in Taoist robes smiled faintly. "Fellow Taoist, you finally achieved your Tao. Congratulations. How did you know that I would achieve my Tao?" Yi Shiwen asked. "I didn't know," the old man said slowly, "but I knew that someone would achieve his Tao. Since I cast the wordless Taoist steel, it was only a matter of time. However, I didn't expect that after waiting for hundreds of epochs, someone who could discuss Tao with me finally appeared. So, fellow Taoist has seen everything that happened in the past few years?" Yi Shiwen asked. "No, I didn't have time to pay attention to it in the past few years. Fellow Taoist came here as soon as you achieved your Tao. You must have felt the threat of the outer realms," the old man in Taoist robe said. Yi Shiwen nodded with a solemn expression. He looked over and saw that beyond the edge of the primal chaos, beyond the crystal wall, there was an endless army of the outer realms. Boundless black gas drowned everything. They were special creatures, different from the creatures of the martial epoch and all the ancient epochs. It's all thanks to fellow Taoist keeping watch at the edge of the primal chaos. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Yi Shiwen said, "It's all right. This is what I should do. After all, it's the world that I created." The old man in Taoist robes said, "Since fellow Taoist has achieved his Tao, I can go all out and fight. Does fellow Taoist want to come with me? Let's go, let's go." The 2 figures left the primal chaos and entered another crystal wall. The war between the 2 civilizations could break out at any moment. End of book.